The story started off in a church, where a crowd had gathered, their eyes fixed on the stage, where our protagonist Claus Nolder was about to have his skill appraised by a priest. He declared his skill was auto mode, which at first shocked everyone, because the skill name was never heard before, making it a unique skill. Because it was unique, knights wanted to recruit him, and so did the capital city's guild. Regardless, Claus knew this unique power was immense, and he believed this was the dawn of his legend, the beginning of a grand star adventure. The scene shifted to the middle of a dangerous forest. Claus was standing alone, as he realized his hopes were for nothing. 3 years had passed, and at 18 years old, Claus was still stuck at a measly level 10. As it turned out, auto mode at level 1 was only good enough to just simply teleport him home from dungeons or any other location, and at skill level 2. He could also use auto travel to instantly navigate to any place he had previously visited. However, since it only worked for known locations, his growth had stagnated for years, leading his party members to label him a useless trash. They did not want to ruin their reputation by kicking him out, so they tried to put stress on him slowly over time. So he leaves the party himself. Claus hated how he was treated. Now he was slicing through some weak goblins to vent out his anger. He soon encountered the boss of these goblins, a field hobgoblin. He took a battle stance to finish this subjugation quest by himself. He had been forced to tackle solo missions like this for the past 3 years. He narrowly evaded the monster's opening gambit and prepared a precision-piercing strike. But the creature was already bracing for a counterattack as Claus lunged forward into the heat of battle. They flashed past one another, and Claus somehow landed the finishing blow, finally bringing the massive beast down for good. Exhausted and gasping for air, he watched as the formidable hobgoblin collapsed. He wasted no time carving into the carcass to extract the hobgoblin's glowing magic stone. It was significantly larger than a standard goblin core, which was exactly what he had been hoping for. Using the hilt of his sword, he shattered the stone, releasing a surge of raw, vibrant energy. As he absorbed the power, he finally leveled up, granting his base attributes a much-needed boost. A wave of pure joy and relief washed over him. He had been stuck at level 10 for so long he feared he had hit a permanent ceiling, while his peers had reached level 50. His recent gains had finally shifted the scales, leaving him with 19 attribute points to unlock auto mode level 3. He prepared to invest his points into a new skill, desperately praying for something powerful. He could still hear the echoes of everyone who mocked his abilities for being useless. Pointing a finger toward the heavens, he begged the universe for a stroke of genuine luck. With a deep breath, he confirmed the selection, and the new skill notification flashed before his eyes. His eyes sparkled with anticipation as he read it. Auto resource collection. He wondered if that was all. He slumped to the ground, crushed by the realization that his new power was just a glorified looting tool. Stunned by his bad luck, he could only offer a bitter smile. As they say, high expectations only lead to frustration. He had dreamed of auto-healing or auto-leveling, but with his shift over, it was time to head back. Activating auto-return. The system calculated a 35-minute journey back to his house. He triggered the skill, watching the countdown timer tick away as his body began its trek home. The moment time ran out, he found himself standing right in front of his residence. Before he could even announce his arrival, the door swung open to reveal his 14-year-old half-sister, Liz. Claus apologized for the delay, telling her it was a minor expedition. She scolded him for coming home covered in dirt yet again, and ordered him to bathe before sitting at dinner. He thanked her sincerely for her hard work. For tonight's meal, they were having hard rye bread paired with a savory cabbage and bacon stew. Claus stated he would sit after drying his hairs, but she forced him to eat right now that dinner was served. She demanded he eat while it was still warm, handling the towel herself and telling him she had reheated food for him once already. She hoped it would make him feel slightly better, which turned his expression pale. As he realized, she noticed he was worried about something. She guessed it must be about his adventure work. He nodded, and Liz followed up with a question if his skill leveled up. Claus replied it did, but apologized still. She doesn't understand why he was sorry, he mentioned, because he had not made much money and always caused her troubles. Apparently, Liz's father did not return from battle, and soon after Claus's father, who took her in, also went missing. He felt responsible to support themselves ever since then. Before he felt any more guilt, she gave him a warm, comforting hug and asked softly if that made him feel any better. Claus felt a wave of awkwardness, but Liz clarified that she was the one who felt like a burden for being too young to work. She told him to stop stressing over his skill and just focus on being himself. She reminded him that she was nearly 15, near the age of awakening, and promised to support him once she awakened her own abilities. She got in the heat of the moment and told him he could have this kiss on his forehead for now, after which both Claus and Liz were flustered, and she bolted off to her room, claiming she needed to sleep. She also added that her only wish was that he come home safely every day, then wished him good night. After she left, Claus sighed, and he felt a lot better, now hoping to do his best again tomorrow. At that time, he did not realize that his unique skill, which had been useless for him until now, would reach its true potential at level 3 and become so significant that it would change the world. The true nature of his skill was to actually achieve its goals automatically without any failure. The next day, he found himself in a poisonous swamp, baffled to see 30 antidote herbs already in his possession. He had originally come to this field just to finish a simple herb gathering mission. He checked his new skill out of curiosity, and surprisingly found a whole list of items he could gather in this area. The system allowed him to input a specific quantity and give him estimated time for completion. After selecting 30 herbs, the system calculated a completion time of just 4 minutes. That was absurdly fast considering it would take just 10 seconds to harvest one, which should not be possible normally. He activated it to test it, and after the time hit 0, he realized this was no joke. The skill was the real deal. Testing his limits, he targeted 10 rare petrification herbs. In around 8 minutes, the task was done. Next, he tried even rarer macho grass, which was also gathered within just 15 minutes, and they were worth about 50 times of antidotal herbs from a quest. He thought of trying to find the rarest of them all, legendary dragon herb, one of which could fund a whole castle. It showed 127 hours to find it, leaving Claus shocked it was really possible, even though it would take more than 5 days. He figured there was also danger if he were to wake up in a weird place after the timer runs out, since it could grow anywhere in this vast place. He then realized it might be the case that the herb could take 5 days because the location of the herb was far away from here. In that case, he decided to try something and went to a well-known resource field, Wailing Gorge, prepared with a gas mask that would keep him safe for 2 hours. This place was deadly poisonous, which also makes it an untapped place for higher valued resources. He opened the auto resource collection and saw mandrake in the list. That was exactly what he wanted, and it worth 10 times its weight in gold. Since it was about 24 minutes, he activated his skill right away and fell asleep. Time went by quickly. His eyes slowly opened. A rare mandrake was resting in his palm. Elated, he began celebrating. Just then, a huge creature appeared from the rocks, and his level 2 senses screamed warning. The beast's open mouth was already closing. It was a beer-rank monster, the dreaded rock lizard. Reacting instantly, he narrowly dodged the creature's powerful tail. He stared at the predator, fear paralyzing him. Such a creature was out of place. Realizing this was likely the end, he closed his eyes and apologized to Liz. But as he recalled her smile, he knew he could not leave her alone. He had to fight. He could not believe he had considered giving up. He had promised he would never leave her, and he would find a way home, no matter how unlikely. Now he was driven by determination. The creature suddenly recoiled and looked away, leaving him completely confused. It seemed visibly disturbed. And that was when he spotted the mandrake still in his hand. When he pointed the root at it, the massive lizard actually cowered. It seemed impossible such a small item could do this, but his mind began racing. A mandrake scream drained the life of anyone who heard it, but since he was unconscious during the harvest, he was spared. The lizard was the one on the verge of death, marking the start of his legendary rise. This was a story of a man once mocked for possessing a seemingly useless skill. Now, he finally had a real chance. Returning home victorious with the stone lizard's head and toe, he was met with a happy, heartwarming welcome from his dear sister. The next morning in the Adventurers Guild, a young woman stretched, readying herself for the day ahead. Tareen, the lead receptionist, was energetic and eager to do her best today. Her colleagues looked tired, so Tareen reminded them that they were the guild's representatives and must stay sharp. They had been swamped with paperwork, but she insisted they remain graceful. The chaos was due to a sudden surge of adventurers bringing in tons of loot, making cataloging a nightmare. But as they tidied up, Tareen realized a certain regular had not shown up in a while. She worried about Claus, the low-ranking veteran she had watched. Suddenly, the guild doors burst open as someone entered with a loud, happy greeting. It was Claus, looking happier than ever as he entered. He was loaded with items, having leveled up to 19. The staff was stunned by his transformation, though the other receptionists groaned at the mountain of work his haul, including that stone lizard head would create. Meanwhile, a beaming Tareen rushed over to welcome him back, greeting him with a look of joy and kindness. She confessed her worry, but Claus shocked the room by revealing he had been conquering the poisonous swamp and the Gorge of Woes. Tareen pointed out that he had arrived without an appointment, giving the lazy receptionists hope they might avoid extra paperwork. She rushed to the counter, stunned to find a genuine stone lizard, a rare material requiring specialized storage. While she insisted his safety was the guild's main concern, Claus revealed another surprise. He pulled out a mandrake, explaining he wanted to sell this legendary root. The receptionist stared in disbelief, baffled by how a rookie like him got such a prize. Everyone shocked, she told him to follow her to her private office. As he was ushered inside, Claus desperately pleaded his innocence, but the heavy door slammed shut. Now standing before the guildmaster, the D-rank adventurer trembled as his records were scrutinized. Madame Salazar maintained a piercing gaze, evaluating him while sipping her tea. He was relieved he was not summoned for a lecture. Instead, she revealed she had brought him here to commend his recent performance. However, There was a serious matter, and it concerned the legendary mandrake on the tray. Such an item was nearly impossible for a low-ranker to find, and they demanded to know how he acquired it. Caught off guard, Claus began sweating under the pressure. He stammered that he had found it in the Gorge of Woes by dumb luck. They eyed him suspiciously, pressing him to confirm if that was the whole story. After the exhaustive meeting, a sigh of relief escaped him, his heart pounding with elation. He was eager for a celebration, relieved he hadn't had to fabricate anything. He had merely conveniently left out the specifics of his unusual talent. Feeling the satisfying heft of the coin purse in his hand, he decided that every bit of anxiety was justified given the substantial reward. With 22 gold coins filling his pocket, enough to purchase more than 200,000 loaves of bread, he knew Liz would be thrilled. The guildmaster clarified that despite the mandrake's retail value of 250 gold, the guild share was 65, an amount they couldn't even disperse right now. Recognizing the worth of the loot, she proposed he exchange it for items more aligned with his requirements. He departed with 13 magic stones in addition to the lizard bounty, a much more generous payout than he anticipated, and ideal for his upcoming level advancement. Yet, as he made his cheerful departure from a nearby window, something seemed off. He was seen as an untalented nobody until the day before, and now he was unexpectedly hauling in S-rank items. It aroused suspicion that a D-rank hunter could defeat such a creature, let alone leave the king's ransom in gold and silver. Her boss directed her to diligently observe him, sensing he might become someone to count on in the future. She confidently accepted, promising to keep him within her sights. Upon reaching some barren lands, he activated his helmet's light to enter the Twilight Mine, an unproductive pit notorious for being despised by every novice hunter. Having already witnessed the capabilities of auto-gathering, he was intrigued to see what additional mining features his system could unlock. Now that he had attained level 27, he was resolved to find out what treasures he could extract from his pit, unaware that he had a stalker behind him, watching everything he does on orders of the guildmaster. 1,000 years ago, dwarves had mined valuable mithril at this site. Nowadays, it has been reduced to a simple source for glowstones. These stones were vital as light sources, but their value was a meager few copper coins, regardless of their size. But he possessed a secret advantage, and he promptly requested the system to display his gathering options. Even close to the entrance, it would only require 4 minutes to mine 20 sizable glowstones. Pleased with the efficiency, he initiated auto-gathering. With a smile, he instructed his pickaxe to prepare for intense activity because they were going to be busy that day. Watching from afar, the woman following him noticed he had a peculiar tendency to talk to himself. She only did this as a courtesy to her sister, irritated that a high ranker like herself had to spy on a newbie. But the instant she dropped her guard, he disappeared. She spun out of her hiding place, daggers drawn and poised to strike, and began searching the area for him, bewildered since he was standing right there a moment ago. Abruptly, a sound directed her gaze upward. He had already scaled the cave wall, and she had no idea how he moved so quickly. Determined to keep up, she followed the same path, refusing to let him elude her. As a mid-rank adventurer, she had her pride, and she would not be shaken off that easily. The sight was surreal as he effortlessly glided across the sharp rocks with exceptional skill. They arrived at a higher plateau, but the distance between them remained substantial. She simply could not understand how a supposed novice was capable of this. At this point, she was desperate to discover the truth about who this guy really was. At the same time, his auto-gathering timer expired. As he opened his eyes, he noticed he had already obtained 20 large glowstones. He stared at the haul with the same surprise as before, and a smile of pure satisfaction appeared on his face. This was remarkable. His new skill was performing even better than he could have hoped. With 20 stones already secured, reaching his goal of 200 would be effortless. His skill led him to a vein so rich that he barely needed to exert himself. The stones here were remarkably large, and the sheer dimensions of the crystals he was unearthing surpassed his greatest expectations. He excitedly thought that he and his sister would eat like royalty that night, while the girl watched, wondering why he talked to himself so often. Now that the mission was officially complete, his bag was practically overflowing with more stones than he actually needed. As he paused, he realized how powerful this skill was. But there was still a significant drawback. There were a countless number of other rare ores in this cave that could be mined. However, the options available for his skill were strictly tied to minerals he had previously come across. Just because he could locate them did not guarantee it would be simple. The gathering time for high-tier materials was exceptionally long. He had struck gold with a mandrake, but this spirit gem was an S-rank treasure. Harvesting it took more than 30 minutes, making it a highly prized item craved by every elite mage. His excited shouts startled the girl spying on him, making her wonder just what she was missing. This item was morbidly interesting, as these gems were rumored to be crystallized human souls discovered in graveyards. He had to consider his choices carefully. This was a gamble with potentially deadly consequences, and the risk was enormous. The real danger started when he woke up, and as before, only the Mandrix effect saved his life. Thankfully, he was no longer a pushover. He had advanced to level 27. With refined sword skills, a superior dagger, and level 3 senses, he felt no immediate danger. Plus, he had a secret weapon in his arsenal. Nevertheless, even with those advantages, this was not a decision to be taken lightly. It was a low-level dungeon with minimal risks. He had triggered his auto-collection skill. I'm ticked by, and he eventually came around, his face a picture of utter shock as he found himself grasping a legendary gem. Overwhelmed with joy, he started jumping up and down, only to accidentally step on a random bone on the ground. That's when he took in his surroundings. Towers of skulls were all around him, making silence crucial for survival. Deep within these pitch-black dwarven catacombs, he needed a glow stone just to make out the wall he had unwittingly broken through. Checking his system, he saw that it would take almost 7 hours to get back home. He felt confident he could make it, but a worry still lingered. What if he never woke up? Also, he was wondering how on earth he could explain where he discovered such a unique gem. He couldn't exactly tell the truth about where it came from or how he got it. At this point, it was definitely best to head back while he was still awake. Fortunately, it was just a cemetery, an actual dungeon. He would already be surrounded by skeletons and ghosts. Auto mode worked well, but it kept dropping him into danger until his glowstone revealed a presence nearby. He noticed someone observing him from the shadows, startling them both. The pair released a synchronized, chilling scream at the sudden surprise. He panicked, thinking she was a ghost, which only irritated her. Suddenly, an eerie light flickered behind her. A skeletal knight appeared from the depths of the catacombs, its terrifying aura freezing them in place. As it let out a furious battle cry, the children's screams reverberated through the desolate, hollow tombs. Without waiting to see what would happen, they ran, sprinting for their lives with the monster right behind them. Catching her breath, she explained that the creature was a skeletal knight, a deadly, mid-rank undead. It was a ruthless killer that tore apart the living with ease, and even she would struggle to defeat it alone. He thanked her for the info until he noticed her obvious pointed ears. With her dark skin and short height, she looked just like a dark elf, but she punched him before he could even finish the sentence. Her name was Tiara, and she demanded that he stop staring at her with those awful eyes, but he maintained his innocence. Unfortunately, their arguing didn't stop the skeletal knight from relentlessly gaining ground. They went into a corridor to get away from it. But while they argued over whose fault it was, they reached a dead end. The realization dawned on him. They were completely stuck. The knight was already upon them, raising its rusty blade to strike a final lethal blow. At the last moment, he was pushed aside, holding his head in a daze as he stumbled across the dirt. It was the girl who saved him, now trying desperately to brace herself against the creature's relentless attack. The blow was stronger than anticipated. This might be an intermediate ranked monster. Struggling, she screamed at him to run. She told him not to worry and to focus on getting away, while she kept the beast busy, not wanting to waste another second. He obeyed, cursing his weakness as just a D-rank adventurer who could not really help. But as he ran, memories of his sister randomly flashed through his mind. That thought alone made him turn around. Just as the elf girl was about to give up, gripping his pickaxe, he attacked the skeleton's head, denting its helmet with a blow so forceful it broke off a few teeth. This gave the girl a crucial opportunity, but the enraged creature immediately turned its gaze toward the boy with a sweeping spin. It slammed its large shield into both of them, and the skeleton roared as they fell to the ground. She called him a fool for staying, but he refused to let a girl, especially one who reminded him of his sister, fight his battles. If he was going home, he was doing it with his pride intact. He had never tried this before and had no idea what might happen. But this new skill felt incredibly dangerous. The skill, it turned out, had been saving the best until now. Finally, he activated the 4th level of his unique skill, Auto Battle. The first level of this mode allowed him to go back home from anywhere without fail. Level 2 allowed for auto travel to familiar locations, while level 3 was for gathering resources. But at level 4, something much more deadly was unlocked, a guaranteed victory through an auto combat sequence. The system warned that the process would take 13 minutes, leaving him excited to see what a top-tier adventurer could do. The girl begged him once more to run, but he confidently stated that it was time to turn this skeleton into dog food. With that, he triggered the skill he had been holding onto since the beginning, Auto Battle. As soon as he activated the skill, he fell into a deep, trance-like sleep. Yet despite his closed eyes, his body moved instinctively into a perfect combat position. For now, the skeleton remained totally unaware of the change in its opponent. The girl watched in disbelief at anyone watching. It really looked like he had fallen asleep in the middle of the fight. Worried, she tried to wake him up just as the skeleton swung its blade toward his neck. But as if guided by a sixth sense, his body smoothly avoided the lethal strike. The monster's massive blade sliced through nothing but air. It struck again and again, but the result was still the same. Angered, the skeleton increased its attack, but no blow could touch the boy. This constant series of misses was clearly starting to frustrate the undead warrior. The girl, gripped by terror, implored him to cease provoking the creature as it relentlessly tried to strike him down. As a thick cloud of dust settled, the skeleton knight finally ceased its offensive, leaving the elf braced for the worst. To her astonishment, he emerged from the obscured cloud completely safe and sound. With incredible speed, he succeeded in retrieving his beloved pickaxe. Stunned that he remained alive, she wondered if he had intentionally provoked the creature. She was baffled as to how tools made for digging could be utilized as weapons, yet he wielded them with expert skill, gaining great force. He propelled himself toward the monster, making a direct impact unavoidable. She closely observed the engagement, her jaw dropping as the skeleton's helmet went flying. It was this humble D-rank adventurer who delivered the crucial blow, finally creating a dent in the massive skeleton's armor. While she questioned this boy's true identity, the skeleton bellowed in a state of utter, unrestrained fury. It darted toward the adventurer, unleashing a rapid series of strikes too swift to perceive. Yet he evaded them with apparent ease. Regardless of the monster's efforts, it failed to land even a single blow, enabling the boy to patiently await the ideal opportunity for a counterattack. Employing his pickaxe, he shattered the skeleton's arm and disarmed its blade, all while the elf girl looked on in stunned silence. Barely avoiding a shield bash, he leaped into the air and landed perfectly on his shovel handle, leaving the girl immobilized by a mix of awe and fear. With less than 8 minutes remaining, she couldn't help but question what kind of being this man really was. Meanwhile, at the Adventurers Guild, the receptionist was rendered completely speechless. The moment she spotted the brilliant jewels situated right before her, she nearly jumped out of her skin. It was a spirit gem, an artifact of incredible and legendary rarity. Claus quickly quieted her, eager to maintain a low profile before he attracted too much attention. He physically covered her lips to calm her as onlookers began to mistake the enormous jewel for a run-of-the-mill glowstone. As Claus attempted to divert the discussion, the receptionist inquired if he fully grasped the magnitude of his discovery, and Claus could only offer an awkward smile, realizing he might have accidentally gone too far once again. Annoyed, she prepared to scold him, but Claus's only concern was avoiding another frightening trip to the back office. However, his good luck ran out when the door swung open, revealing the one woman he was hoping to avoid. She gave him a subtle beckoning signal, but when he hesitated, she emitted a powerful shout that reverberated through the hall. Startled and resigned, Claus was escorted by the receptionist directly into the lion's den. He once again found himself confined within the guild's private office. He sat uncomfortably on the couch with the spirit gem placed on the table between them like a ticking time bomb. The guild master firmly demanded to know exactly how he had come to possess such a unique item. Claus attempted to claim he simply stumbled upon it, but the old lady remained unconvinced. She demanded to know the precise location. He claimed to have found it in the Twilight Mine, but the guild staff remained skeptical of his story. The old woman scrutinized the item, asking if Claus understood its actual worth. He guessed a single gold coin. In truth, a gem smaller than a fingernail was worth that much. He recalled the legend of heroes who defeated a dragon, where the legendary scepter held a gem the size of a fist. Claus glanced at the gem on the table, then at his own clenched hand. It was precisely the size of his fist. The old woman sighed as a heavy silence enveloped the space. Finally, she broke the quiet, declaring the gem to be a national treasure. Upon hearing this, Claus was rendered completely speechless. He sat frozen on the couch as she revealed its retail value was at least 600 gold coins. Once refined and incorporated into a staff, its value could soar to 10,000. Seeing his shock was precisely what she intended, but she explained the guild could only offer 100 gold for it in its raw condition. She assured him they were not trying to undervalue it. That was simply the fair market price for an unrefined gem. 100 gold coins represented a fortune, sufficient for Claus to retire and never have to work another day. However, she extended a second option. He could be compensated with high-grade magic stones instead. Presenting both alternatives, she waited to see which path he would choose. Without a moment's hesitation, Claus selected magic stones. The old lady smiled, congratulating him on choosing the path of an elite adventurer. She handed them over, but left him with a chilling warning. If he absorbed excessive essence at once, he might literally explode. She hoped they would serve him well, but Claus was now paralyzed by fear. As she watched him depart, she reflected on the anomalies: a mandrake, a spirit gem, and a mid-tier skeleton, all appearing within a beginner zone. Even with a witness present, the reality of the situation was nearly impossible to accept. He asserted that a mid-rank elf assisted in the kill, but her current whereabouts remained a complete mystery. With only 9 seconds remaining, the skeleton had been reduced to rubble, a sword embedded deep within its skull. As the chaos subsided, Claus finally returned to consciousness. He was immediately overwhelmed by a wave of agony. Every muscle, bone, and joint in his body was screaming. The elf cautioned him that cheap potions were ineffective for such trauma, handing him a high-grade tonic to ensure his safe journey home. A single bottle cost a full gold coin, a steep price the elf insisted every serious adventurer must be willing to afford. Claus confessed he was merely a penniless rookie and questioned her rank, which he proudly confirmed as a seasoned veteran. He wondered why she was lingering in a beginner's area, but she concealed the truth that she was spying on him. To cut off any further questioning, she made a swift exit. Later, during a confidential debriefing, an older woman pressed her to reveal anything else of note. Despite the woman's substantial expectations, the girl could only tender a sincere apology for the resulting issues. She specified that Claus behaved oddly within the mine, which caused her to expose her identity when the skeleton made an appearance. Although her actions did save his life, the old woman stated unambiguously that there would be no tolerance for similar errors moving forward. Upon being asked for a conclusive summary, the elf stated clearly that the old woman had entirely misinterpreted the chain of events. She was not the one responsible for defeating the skeleton knight. The old woman looked shocked, questioning whether Claus was predominantly responsible for the creature's demise. The elf went a step further, stating frankly she did not contribute at all. She was simply watching. The entire structured defeat was plotted and carried out by Claus on his own. Even as the enraged skeleton began to utilize its shield as a deadly weapon, Claus stood firm. Claus evaded each and every attack until he skillfully grabbed a shovel using his foot. He struck the creature's remaining limb, leaving the monster completely defenseless. Soon after, he started to repeatedly strike its skull. The violent assault did not pause even for a moment. He continued his relentless attack until the monster was utterly destroyed. Claus had transitioned to offense, single-handedly defeating the skeleton knight, which left Tiara in complete shock. Once back at the guild, the receptionist listened to this account with a look of complete disbelief. She anticipated more from an elf, but Tiara swore that a low-level adventurer truly did defeat a mid-tier monster. However, the receptionist drew attention to an obvious detail based on the loot Claus brought back. That was not just a skeleton knight. It was a skeleton general that was a high-level monster, which explained why even Tiara found it difficult to confront. Now the story was even more unbelievable, and they were left wondering about Claus's true identity while he was off buying steak for his sister. They pushed Tiara to be truthful, but she reiterated that she had disclosed everything she knew. Examining the record of items on Claus's profile, he was technically still a D-rank adventurer. He had journeyed into the misty forest to gather a considerable amount of items. The catalog included 23 goblin leader ears, 5 from chiefs, 224 from standard goblins, and 1 from a hobgoblin. He also handed in 22 fangs from kobold soldiers, 7 from kobold elites, and 389 from regular kobolds. To round things out, there were 21 slime cores and 1 small mandrake sprout. His collection included 100 daggers, 5 axes, 30 shields, a club, 10 short spears, and 20 swords. And to top it all off, he even obtained a piece of rare aromatic accompanied by a large variety of magic stones. As expected, the other adventurers nearby were filled with jealousy because of his haul. It was undoubtedly an extraordinary amount of loot for a single individual. For his hard work, he acquired a substantial 26 gold, 130 silver, and a number of copper coins. Claus was delighted to see his efforts rewarded so directly. Simultaneously, the receptionists were overwhelmed by the huge workload. His life had changed drastically since his skill evolved, and upon seeing his large intake, they attempted to offer some guidance. They cautioned him that carrying such an extensive amount of loot on his own must be a difficult endeavor, but Claus assured them it was simpler than they thought. In fact, it was almost too easy. This left them utterly speechless. He clearly did not understand the implication they were trying to make. He was turning in so much loot that the assessment had evolved into a staff nightmare. After pocketing his reward cheerfully, he made a happy departure from the guild. The day's tasks had been remarkably efficient and greatly profitable. It was obvious the auto battle was his ultimate ace in the hole. Yet, he pondered how it would manage a huge number of enemies, so he resolved to put its limits to the test. He made his way to the misty forest, an area populated only by weak monsters. Now, at level 38, it was the perfect place to eliminate any remaining questions about his new ability. He knew these woods like the palm of his hand, and spotting no elite monsters, he initiated the skill. As soon as the process was complete, he came to a firm decision. Claus had just undertaken a thorough exploration of the entire forest, wiping out every single monster before the day was over without taking any damage whatsoever. Even after activating his new ability dozens of times consecutively, he felt no negative effects at all. However, his confidence was somewhat diminished by the fact that he had only used the skill on weak creatures, leaving him uncertain about whether he could handle a real threat. He had pinpointed two key shortcomings. The first was the duration of the cooldown, which made him wait a minute before changing between battle modes. If auto-gathering ended and an enemy attacked him suddenly, he was unable to trigger auto-battle until the timer reset. The second shortcoming was the issue of unknown enemies. Before the skill could target an enemy, he had to land at least one manual strike to record the enemy initially. Still, there's no question the skill represented an absolute revolution for all of his goals, even though the mechanics were still a bit of a mystery to him. When night fell, Claus headed back home, having completely lost all sense of time during his training. As he opened the door to apologize, he was met by a flying spoon that smacked him right in the forehead, followed by Liz catching it with quick reflexes. She reminded him with an icy tone of how late he was, noting that he had promised to return much earlier. His consequence was a dinner of cold soup. He tried to explain that he had simply gotten carried away and had not noticed when the sun disappeared. Liz admitted she knew he was thrilled about his new power, but she warned him that if he returned home hurt, she would not be so understanding. She mentioned the incident of the skeleton, where his potions had failed to heal everything, and the bruises she found had caused a significant scolding. Since that day, she had been consistently worried about his dangerous actions. Claus apologized and swore that he had not been in any real danger, but Liz was not fooled by his attempt to ease her mood with kindness. Since he had brought it up, she suggested he purchase those mythical kitchen utensils they had seen earlier, a collection that cost 12 gold coins. Feeling a twinge of guilt, he agreed to buy them. Liz had once joked that pots that expensive were only fit for cooking dragons, but now, with intensity in her expression, she warned him that if he came home injured, he would end up in the stew. Softening her words shortly after, she begged him to promise he would be careful and make no more dangerous moves. Claus raised his hands, acting like he was surrendering, showing that he fully agreed to her conditions. He promised to return safely to his sweet, lovable, and adored sister, and Liz blushed a little at his sudden show of affection. He knew that what she said was right, while he was aiming for greatness. He could not let his goals cause his sister any more suffering. He asked if she would make hot soup for dinner, and she agreed, after directing him to hurry up and take a bath first. During dinner, he shared his impressive earnings, and Liz was shocked to find out they actually had enough for the mithril set. After a long, tiring day, they finally went to sleep, and morning arrived quicker than they expected. Claus got ready to leave, excited to make a name for himself. He now had a small cargo cart to help him carry his equipment and loot. As Liz brought him some food, she asked about the new addition, and he explained that he had rented the cart from the guild earlier. She wondered if he was planning to become a street vendor, but Claus explained this would allow him to go even farther into the wild. To reach the top, he needed to make the impossible a reality, and that started with better preparation. And it would be simpler to haul back all the treasures he found on his travels, as his reputation among other adventurers was still very low. Finding allies was practically not possible at the moment. By renting the cart, he had at least solved his inventory issues and could work solo with greater effect. For today's plan, he planned to clear out every single open mission across 3 popular beginner areas. He disappeared toward the horizon, leaving Liz to wonder if the task in front of him was truly not possible. Back at the Adventurers Guild, the receptionists were nearly at their breaking point. They had noticed that Claus had accepted a shocking number of quests from the Poisonous Swamp and Twilight Mine to the Gorge Woods, an amount of work that might normally take a full party several days to finish. His return tonight seemed quite unlikely. Shireen, however, gave a confident smile and told the others they were worrying incredibly early. She refused to get stressed until one of Claus's miracles actually occurred, despite his history of pulling off the impossible. But if he did succeed, the guild would need to perform an official action, even if those steps brought terrible consequences for the lone explorer himself. A mysterious hooded figure stood nearby by the mission board, listening closely when she overheard the receptionist's frantic gossip about Claus. Over in the guild's tavern, the local customers were also complaining about how Claus had annoyed Tureen yet again. This angered the men, as they were all secretly in love with the beautiful receptionist. While the group made fun of the lone Claus, the girl in the hood made an effort to enjoy her food before ultimately becoming impatient. She walked up to the loud group and mentioned that their discussion seemed extremely interesting. When one adventurer became aggressive, she defused the situation quickly by buying a round of beverages for everyone at the table. Pulling up a seat, she introduced herself as Maram, an adventurer of low status, and eagerly requested to discover more about this Claus. A man with a bald head joked regarding her curiosity about such an oddball, which, realistically, was not the way she had envisioned starting her investigation. In the interim, Claus was concentrating intently on a map displaying local routes for carpooling. He had previously depended on these carriages as a means of traveling to faraway places, but his persona had evolved. As he looked at his donkey, he got ready to test the animal's velocity and carrying ability to their maximum for the challenging day that lay ahead. An elf who had been observing him, intending to determine exactly what his plans were. She ridiculed him for departing prematurely and relying on a sluggish donkey, asserting that he was of low rank and lacked the knowledge of how to make investments in suitable equipment such as a horse. However, her taunt suddenly turned to astonishment as Claus triggered his auto-travel ability. The wagon raced rapidly down the road and disappeared from her vision immediately. She could only observe, standing there in complete disbelief before starting to sprint after him and begging him to stop, bewildered by how a donkey could move at such unbelievable velocities. In the meantime, Claus arrived at his destination, the poisonous swamp. Precisely as the travel countdown reached 0, he snapped out of his daze, and his eyes gently opened as he woke up. The first thing he noticed was the sign clearly indicating the swamp's entrance. He stood on top of his wagon, looking at the depressing scenery. For him, the trip had seemed instant. A horse carriage typically required over 2 hours, but judging by the position of the sun, it had been less than 90 minutes. This exceptional efficiency made him feel immensely satisfied. He could scarcely believe that his auto-travel skill functioned so efficiently on a vehicle, and it was even quicker than walking. A journey that typically took an hour was shortened to just 35 minutes in auto mode. This brought to mind an occasion when he had raced a knight to assess his speed, where he had overwhelmingly beaten the skilled soldier. Claus had kept a 15-minute advantage, leaving the tired knight desperate for a rematch. The knight protested that utilizing his skill shouldn't count as a display of personal capabilities and firmly stated that if he had been running unassisted, he never would have been defeated by Claus. Ultimately, the race was declared void, with the knight blaming his poor health for the humiliating loss. At that time, Claus had only been level 1, whereas the knight he competed against was level 50. He began to realize that his talent might not be as useless as he had initially believed, since utilizing it on a vehicle presented numerous possibilities. He still wasn't certain exactly how. Somehow his donkey had outpaced a full-blooded horse. From that moment forward, he had no more doubts. The only determining factor now was his skill in controlling his ability. However, the mystery behind the specific mechanics of his power remained his greatest concern. Nearby, the donkey whinnied dejectedly, and upon closer observation of the animal, he identified a blindfold over its eyes, which revealed the cause of its distress. Simultaneously, the elf was closely pursuing him, at least trying to, and she noticed on the path some peculiar marks and was convinced that they were undoubtedly his. She understood they must have taken shortcut, but directly in the pathway of those wheels rested a large log, through which she guided the wagon like a pro, with his blind donkey at that. Back at the guild, Marin was still determined to reveal the truth concerning Claus, specifically if he was just an innocuous eccentric or a credible threat. The bald man consented to clarify and recounted a memorable story from several years earlier, back when Claus's level was still 1. He joined a high-stakes race against an elite knight. Claus had not just won. He completed the race with a 15-minute head start, although people hadn't found it initially questionable. The real shock originated from the shortcut he used in the last part across a large bridge. As opposed to crossing ordinarily, he had leaped to the side, a fall that would have been fatal for anybody else. But that still was not the most insane part. Beneath the bridge, his landing area was obstructed by a solid wall. Somehow, he had adjusted his course midair, evading every obstacle before managing to land on one wooden plank. With barely enough space for a person to fit through, he squeezed through a window, putting his life in danger for even a slight opportunity. The witness admitted that he had never witnessed such a display and cautioned her to stay away from Claus before she remunerated him with 2 silver coins for the information. Unfortunately for his advisory, a man exhibiting the exact skills was precisely who she had been trying to find. She was confident that this mysterious person was worthy of trust. Before she was able to depart, the bald man reminded her that she still needed to pay for the drinks she had ordered, causing her to regret her impulsive kindness as she settled the bill. Claus had already progressed into the heart of the poisonous swamp. The elf observed him from afar, her expression changing to shock. She noticed a mountain of mission papers in his cart and saw Claus encircled by an abundance of uncommon loot, precisely the specific materials and items required to finish every quest present in the region. In what appeared to be record time, he had been able to finish every mission that was available in the locality. Even with this substantial haul weighing him down, there was still ample space available in his cart for more. Nothing made any sense to her. That donkey cart was moving at a significantly faster rate than she could run. She had thought that she was behind him by only about 30 minutes, but that was obviously enough time for him to clear the entire board. This was a devastating blow for her. If she couldn't bridge the divide quickly, she would have nothing to tell her sister except for her own shortcomings. As Claus departed for the Twilight Mine, the elf consumed 2 potent potions just to keep up with his frantic pace. In her eagerness to discover his secret, she refused to allow an adventurer of her level to be outpaced by a man like him, even though the cart seemed to be doing a better job of it than her pride could stomach. And so the rapid chase through the wilderness continued. 6 hours later, they reached the Gorge of Woes, where the elf had positioned herself on a craggy rock to observe Claus's carriage. She grumbled that he was unusually slow this time, having become impatient while waiting for him to finally reach her position. Realizing she couldn't equal his natural speed, she had taken a shortcut to get there first, a resourceful tactic stemming from her inability to keep up. She wanted to boast, but secretly she felt humiliated by the effort it took. Now, perfectly concealed, she prepared to see if Claus was truly skilled or simply a common trickster. While watching him, the elf wondered why he had paused before entering the ravine. Checking his system, Claus saw he was only 30 seconds from his objective. He used his skill and vanished instantly, reappearing behind the hidden elf. Startled, she turned around only to find Claus already there, holding his pickaxe. As he started mining the rock, the elf did her utmost to stay hidden. She was unnerved. This seemingly low-ranking adventurer had appeared behind her silently. She was now seriously questioning whether he was as weak as his rank suggested. While she was immersed in thought, Claus produced a mandrake, and the sprout immediately emitted a piercing scream. This sound was deadly to whoever heard it, proving that he was not just a low-ranked rookie. By nightfall, Claus went home, leaving the elf behind, lying on the ground nearly lifeless from the scream. Later that night, a front desk worker held a meeting with the guild leader. Reviewing Claus's records, they realized that the adventurer promotion season had finally arrived. The front desk worker wanted to know how to handle his situation, as he obviously couldn't stay at his current level. Despite working alone, his accomplishments rivaled those of a seasoned explorer, and a recommendation would secure his exam entry. She examined a recommendation letter sent by a prominent A-rank team, the letter from his former party. Elsewhere, their leader heard that someone would take the exam next week and disregarded the news. It had been a long time since he had heard news from a city, and he assumed Claus was still languishing at the bottom. To him, Claus was a blemish on their reputation, a worthless fool who surely had not achieved much. By the end of the day, Claus had successfully gathered 65 gold coins and a rare mandrake. Meanwhile, the girl who had been searching for him had ended up losing every coin she possessed. Back home, Liz was intensely focused on her cooking. This was the best recipe she had ever devised, and the taste was simply perfect. The secret lay in the pepper she used, and she was sure her brother would love it. She imagined him praising her, telling her that if she kept this up, she would make an amazing wife someday. Lost in her own thoughts, she continued the daydream, picturing a future where they eventually married. Her makeshift fantasy was becoming increasingly strange and obsessive. After her father died in the war, she was adopted by Claus's father, her late father's closest friend. To the outside world, she was just a devoted sister, but her feelings were much deeper than that. While she obsessed over the menu, the real Claus was currently having a meal at the Twilight Mine. However, back at the house, a far more peculiar scene was unfolding. Liz was sitting at the table, surrounded by a collection of cloth dolls. With unwavering seriousness, she opened her eyes and declared the Supreme Council of Milder officially in session. The Treasury Secretary and the Interior Minister were both present, while the Claus doll served as a mere observer. As Supreme Chancellor, was introduced the most pressing topic of the day, deciding what to prepare for dinner. They weighed their options carefully, knowing her brother was handling missions in 3 different locations. A standard meal simply wouldn't do. The Treasury suggested high-end steaks. The Interior Minister pushed for fish. However, the Claus doll insisted that anything made with Liz's love was perfect. She beamed at the sentiment, knowing the real Claus would likely say those exact words to her. While love was a given, the menu remained undecided. Suddenly, one of the counselors asked the Chancellor to have patience. That was General Ladle, who warned that the higher her brother climbed, the more devastating his potential downfall. He asked if she had already forgotten the tragedy that had befallen him 3 years earlier. They flashed back to a heavy rainstorm 3 years ago. Liz arrived home in her raincoat to find Claus slumped over the table. Surprised, she asked why he was not staying at his clan house for the rest of the week as planned. Claus claimed he had simply left, but Liz knew how incredibly hard he had worked to be accepted there. Just a month earlier, he had been at the absolute peak of his happiness. Claus thanked her for the meal, praising Liz's cooking as the very best. She asked if he was truly staying in a castle, having assumed he would be in a training camp, but the castle served as both, despite the Case family's immense wealth. This was actually one of their smaller estates, yet a single room was still 100 times larger than their entire house. Leaving Liz stunned, Claus clearly had a story to tell. His face betrayed his feelings as he started to describe the harsh training sessions he was forced to undergo. He recounted every exhausting lesson he attended, holding nothing back for his younger sister. The very intensity of the program made him uneasy just thinking about it, leading Liz to tell him to stop. He even brought up a martial arts match where he was completely destroyed in record time. Despite the devastating loss, a man by the name of Gain extended a hand to help him back up. Gain wondered how long Claws intended to stay on the ground. Looking up at the man's outstretched hand, Gain told him they were both special due to the fact that they were in possession of unique game-changing abilities. Claws felt his auto mode was insignificant compared to others, but Gain assured him that they only needed to focus on advancing. Gain guaranteed that if Claws needed magic stones to grow, he would provide them so Claws could finally take flight like a dragon. Together, Gain was convinced they were destined to ultimately rule the world. These words intrigued Claws because for the first time, someone truly believed in his untapped potential. However, following that crucial day, Claus's demeanor began to change noticeably. Only 20 days after getting the invitation, he officially became a member of Gain's inner circle. One afternoon, Liz was busy with sewing when Claus came home from an especially tough training session. It was immediately obvious that something was amiss. His cheek was badly bruised and swollen. When she inquired what had occurred, Claus claimed he had simply tripped and fallen face first. But Liz did not believe it as she examined the wound. She was sure he was lying right away. After all, nothing escaped her watchful gaze. She identified the injury as a backhanded strike. When a shocked Claus asked how she knew, she pointed out the mark was identical to their neighbors after a domestic dispute and nearly identical to a move she had been practicing herself. Eventually, he confessed he had a disagreement with Gain because the two of them had a fundamental difference of opinion. Inside the castle, the top-tier party members were gathered in the lounge. They talked about the coming promotion exam to reach medium rank, which typically involved a basic scavenger hunt. However, they thought that as special individuals, they were worthy of a much more distinguished challenge. Glenn agreed completely. He felt nothing but disdain for people he considered ordinary or useless. Child piped up, suggesting they should make their sole exam a truly grand event. In their minds, they were geniuses who were far superior to everyone else in the world. Mika insisted on being treated as an elite, desiring to skip straight to the advanced exam as opposed to associating with inferiors. She then impatiently snapped at Claus, wanting to know why her lemonade was taking so long. To guarantee an impressive debut, Gain suggested a risky strategy, releasing high-level beasts into the testing area so they could rescue everyone. This reckless idea took the entire group by surprise. It turned out he had already instructed Abel and Lane to capture several stone lizards for the scheme. Claus was appalled, explaining that these rare creatures could easily massacre innocent examinees. But Gain could not care less about collateral damage. He simply called Claus out and activated his skill. With a wicked smirk, he struck Claus forcefully with the back of his hand. The blow sent Claus flying as Gain's skill enabled him to briefly freeze his target's movement. Gain then taunted him, gaslighting Claus by claiming he must have imagined the assault and punched himself. He casually directed Lane to escort the unwell Claus home, leaving the boy stunned as the group left. This memory took place outside the castle precisely 10 days before Claus finally quit the team. That moment was the breaking point. The day Claus stopped smiling and their paths finally went in different directions. Claus felt lucky to have such a skill, but he understood luck did not decide how well it worked. Only his determination to push it as far as it could go was what mattered. Liz stared out at the expansive sky through the window, her heart beating fast with a mix of complicated feelings, thinking about his journey and creating a weight to her chest, knowing her brother had been fighting a lonely battle to reach his ambitions. She pledged to act as his source of support, promising to stand right by his side. Second, his dreams finally came true. With eyes sparkling with newfound resolve, she turned to her inner thoughts to decide on a menu for supper. In their own odd way, even her mental projections seemed excited and willing to help. But one inappropriate thought reared its head, a suggestion so improper it could only come from the darkest depths of her mind. This twisted voice suggested that she should offer herself to her own brother, an idea so ridiculous and disgusting that she immediately scolded her mental vassals for such nonsense. They joked that it might happen in the future, but the thought of Claus reminded her that the promotion exam was fast approaching. She would focus on that. At the same time, far away inside the chilly stone walls of the large castle, a jester approached Gain, whispering to him about the newest rumors going around about Claus. Not only was he entering the exam, but he had also secured a solo recommendation, an insult to Gain, who still blamed Claus for ruining their past plans. To make things more interesting, the newest group of rookies was also set to participate in the same trial. This discovery delighted him, as it meant they could give Claus a truly amazing and probably painful reception during the test. Back at the guild, the receptionist wore a frighteningly sweet smile, mentioning that Claus had managed to pull off the impossible yet again. Claus stood there, quaking slightly, while the other staff watched his loot-filled cart with utter dismay. Claus had managed to complete a massive workload that was designed for a 15-man group all on his own, as sorting it out would be a terrible task. The receptionist moved to give him accolades. Snatching his arm, she took him toward room number 3, leaving Claus confused about what he had done wrong. Inside, he saw an official letter of recommendation waiting. The document stated that he was finally able to take the promotion exam. His receptionist celebrated with him, pointing out that the guild had finally seen his incredible advancement. Judging by his recent work, they felt he had outgrown his current rank, and she wished him well on the exam. Days, Claus asked her to clarify, and she confirmed that it was an official recommendation from the guild staff. Because of his skills, he had been invited to the test, and the reality set in. He started jumping and joyfully yelling, making her tell him to quiet down. This was the result of 3 years of hard work. She said that he never gave up even when others teased him. She had seen his stubbornness when he ignored her warnings and dove into high-rank areas and poisonous lands by himself. He had been expecting celebration, but he was already getting a strong lecture. Even if she said he rightly deserved it, she shut the door, planning to fix his lack of judgment and habit of ignoring his environment. Between the huge pile of stuff he brought in daily and his brush with death, she had finally had enough. She told him that he would be staying late helping the guild master process the haul. If they were lucky, they would be done by dawn, but the scolding went on until the next morning. A couple of days passed, and the morning of the promotion exam came. He had been waiting for this for 3 years, and now he could chase his ultimate ambition. Claus walked through the guild doors, exuding excitement. The hall was full of experienced adventurers, and he started studying the crowd. As he walked by, he noticed that almost every other person was part of a group. As per usual, he was on his own, going to a quiet corner to avoid being bothered. Moments later, the receptionists entered and officially started the exam. The staff greeted the crowd, calling out numbers and giving out admission papers. Just then, someone asked Claus if he was the famous loner. For her, it was not hard to single him out. Since she was by herself, Miriam introduced herself, hoping they had something in common. Because they were both outcasts, she proposed that they team up. He barely looked at her, choosing to ignore her. As she argued, the receptionist told them to be quiet, saying that Claus was the only one trying to take the exam himself, which seemed to hit a nerve. Miriam continued, but Claus demanded to know why he should consider partnering with her at all. She said it was a long story. She admitted that her offer might just be because of guilt and nothing else. This left him annoyed by how vague she was. She went on, saying that because they were both loners, they should team up. Claus turned her down again after all of his sacrifices. He did not have time to deal with her disruptions. 3 years had come and gone since he left his team, and he could not let this chance get away. Suddenly, the front desk person announced participant 32, Charlotte, a former teammate of Claus's and a member of the Special Forces. Hearing her name made Claus freeze. As he dealt with the shock of hearing her name announced in this place, his heart beat fast. The crowd murmured about the famous A-rank team, known for its elite members. The front desk person called Charlotte again, threatening a disqualification. But a voice echoed from the entrance, and it was her, announcing her arrival and reassuring the staff there was no need for concern. The heavy guild doors opened wide. A figure confidently stepped into the hall. It had been 3 years since they were last in the same room. Gain strode right past Claus, his presence projecting an obvious arrogance. He caught Claus's eye and could not resist the chance to mock his former comrade. He sarcastically commented that Claus was surprisingly still around, looking as pathetic as ever. Claus glared back, his eyes burning with hatred, struggling to control his rising anger at the sight of him. He clearly remembered how Gain had orchestrated his departure 3 years prior, manipulating things from behind the scenes to force him out. Gain repeated the cruel insults they had once used against him, reminding him that the entire team saw him as a burden. He scoffed, saying that even with a unique skill, Claus was basically useless in combat. The girl nearby asked for permission to kick him out herself. However, Gain explained that he could not simply expel him without cause. There would be consequences. Critics might say he lacked the leadership ability to recruit and manage a proper team. The others were annoyed, concerned that Gain actually intended to keep the dead wait around. Gain actually agreed with their frustrations, but he knew the public would reach the wrong conclusions if he acted impulsively. That was why he would not fire him. He needed the boy to choose to leave voluntarily. He cautioned that this needed to happen quickly, or a fatal accident might just solve the problem for them permanently. Claus soon became a target of harassment and even survived a dangerous accident that he knew was staged. Though he had no proof, he eventually sold his equipment to fund his own training and left on his own accord. Though he still wished he had punched Gain then and there, Claus wondered what Gain was even doing in this town, as his base was in the capital. But then he recalled it was Gain's hometown. Regardless, Claus stated clearly he had nothing to talk about and demanded to be left alone. Gain scoffed, saying he had only approached them to celebrate their miraculous reunion and meet the new member. He mocked the fact that it took such a useless person 3 long years to finally pass the exam. Gain continued his sarcastic attack, faking amazement at Claus's pathetic lack of progress. Fed up with the arrogance, Claus flatly called him an idiot. Before Gain could react, Merrim stepped between them, and Claus was surprised to see she was fiercely defending him. She warned Gain that she would not tolerate his insults, and if he had a problem with her teammate, he would have to deal with her magic. Claus felt a rare sense of relief, genuinely touched to finally have someone standing up for him. Meanwhile, Gain's expression immediately turned into a cold glare. He noted the rural area was swarming with bugs, but Claus remained on high alert. Before things could get out of hand, he grabbed Merrim and made a quick exit. He warned that Gain was ruthless toward women and children, but Merrim snapped back that she was not some helpless girl. She expected a thank you for her assistance, stating that they were teammates now. As Claus scratched his head in frustration, he denied it, but as his number was called, she forced his registration onto her team, and the receptionist approved. Claus tried to protest, but Merrim told him to keep quiet. The task required them to collect particular items within a specific time, but they spotted a strange beast-like girl. Gain warned her about coming alone, while she asked if Claus was the man who supposedly ruined the reputation of the Special Forces. He confirmed it, promising that today he would finally erase that stain from his history. She planned to use him as a stepping stone to stardom, though she noted he had a very peculiar scent. She wondered if it was the scent of a powerful warrior, suggesting Gain's plan might not go as smoothly as he thought. Gain remained unfazed as long as the goal was met. Just as the doors swung open to signify the start, every participant stood ready. The exam was about to begin. The signal finally sounded, and the contestants surged out to begin the hunt. They had to gather 3 specific items by noon the next day, with all team findings being shared equally. Checking her list, Merrim was optimistic, as they already shared several objectives, and claiming victory was guaranteed. Claus drove the cart in a fit of irritation, while Merrim reminded him to stay focused on the most efficient route. She suggested targeting the rare unicorn horn first, and asked for Claus's opinion on the strategy. Still fuming, Claus simply told her to keep quiet. Merrim shrugged it off, asking for his cooperation as partners, though Claus replied that she was the one who had forced her way onto his team. He activated his unique ability, preparing to use his auto-travel skill. Merrim was confused by his actions, but Claus explained he had already locked in their destination. After a quick apology, he announced he would be going solo from here and hit the start button. As his eyes drifted shut, once more, Merrim watched him, wondering if he had actually fallen asleep. Some time went by before his eyes slowly fluttered open again. He had finally arrived at the desolate, unearthed cemetery. It had been a long time since he last visited this ghoul-infested wasteland. Seeing Merrim nowhere in sight, he figured she must have fallen. But Merrim was hanging onto the carriage, absolutely enraged with Claus for not using the main road, left with no other option. The two began their journey through the unsettling graveyard. While the surface was swarming with the undead, even worse horrors were lurking underneath. Skeletal soldiers began clawing their way up from the ground to cut them off. Yet before the monsters could even land a blow, their heads were already being separated from their bodies. Both adventurers were more than capable of dealing with these low-level threats without issue. This dungeon was divided into 2 sections. The surface had weak skeletons, while the underground held mid-level monsters. They could not waste time if they wanted to gather enough ghoul jaws in time. Hearing this, Claus stared at Merrim in surprise, having previously considered her entirely useless. He understood he should not have underestimated her, because the girl was already good enough to take the rank-up exam on her own. Merrim had managed to qualify after just a single year, whereas it had taken Claus 3 years of training to get to that point. Noticing the expression on his face, Merrim jokingly asked if Claus thought she could read minds. She said it was simple. Every partner she had ever been with wore that precise same look of disbelief. Merrim noticed the envy in the crowd's eyes, but Claus looked at her like she was a complete fraud. Just ahead, a large group of skeletons appeared, providing the ideal chance for the mage to shine. Gathered power moved into her staff, as she told Claus to watch the true power of a master mage. Fully confident, Merrim readied to unleash her powerful special attack. She launched the spell forcefully. The destructive energy flew in the entirely wrong direction, heading directly for Claus, who realized the danger a split second too late. The energy ball sped closer, leaving Claus in a cold sweat as he barely dove out of the way in time. The projectile destroyed a tree behind him, vaporizing a section of its trunk. The remaining timber collapsed, crushing a nearby house under its weight as the building crumbled. The skeleton horde turned to see the chaos behind them. Before they could react, the falling rubble crushed the undead like paper. Though the skeletons were obliterated, Claus stood there shocked while Merrim tried to hide her face in embarrassment. With weapon in hand, Claus spoke to his partner, his voice full of disbelief. He asked for an explanation for the near miss, but Merrim simply replied that the attack was technically effective, which somehow made the situation more infuriating. Claus began scolding her, and Merrim's excuse that it was not on purpose only deepened his frustration. Merrim tried to apologize by claiming they were partners, but Claus was too busy trying to process the fact that he had almost been vaporized. Merem changed the subject, noting that the underground monsters were weak to fire and claiming she also had support magic. Claus was now terrified of being burned alive. Finally understanding why Merem had always been a loner, he struggled to find the right words to express his concerns. Suddenly, Merem noticed something and told Claus to focus. A group of suspicious people had gathered ahead, completely blocking the entrance to the catacombs. The path was impassable. An adventurer explained that the area was restricted due to an emergency. A high-level monster had broken into the boss room. Moments later, an A-rank adventurer arrived to warn everyone that the perimeter was far too dangerous for them. As the mist faded, it became clear the dungeon was being cleansed, a process that happened only after a boss was defeated. With the cleansing complete, monsters would no longer spawn, making it impossible for Claus and his team to collect the items they needed. Claus's annoyance peaked when the person behind this mess appeared at the top of the staircase. It was Glenn, holding a trophy skull. Claus recognized him instantly from their time on the same team, confirming his identity to a curious Merem. This Special Forces member, known for his atomic shifting, mocked Claus and noted how fitting it was to find him in such a pathetic rundown place. Claus did not take the bait, instead demanding to know why an A-rank powerhouse was wasting time in the countryside. Glenn claimed he was volunteering as an exam supervisor and said he had luckily stopped a dangerous emperor skeleton that would have slaughtered the students. He boasted that his intervention had prevented a complete massacre. Glenn warned that more anomalies could ruin hunting grounds before moving on, leading Claus to realize this was a clear attempt to sabotage the exam. They needed to move quickly. Claus found it hard to believe they would go to such lengths just to spite him. Merem questioned if they would really destroy a whole hunting ground, but Claus knew these people would do exactly that with a smirk on their faces. They had always fought dirty, and for a moment, Claus was left wondering how to counter their schemes. But he had options. He quickly came up with a counter-strategy to stop their sabotage in its tracks. He decided to push his auto mode to its absolute limit. They had looked down on him as trash for too long, but now he was ready to show them exactly what he was capable of. The scene changed to the mountainous dungeon of Shinam, hidden deep within the peaks. It was now the height of spring. In a field of bright flowers, a mysterious woman was working hard, calling on her magic. She covered the landscape in a blizzard. She mocked his foolishness, knowing Gain had already accounted for every single detail. He was walking right into the trap, and as the monsters began to appear, she was sure she would freeze both his body and his spirit. In the meantime, deep within the guild's headquarters walls, the top-tier special forces had taken over the guest wing for their secret activities. Two figures moved down the hallway, nearing the inner sanctum. They had been strictly following their directives, either clearing out entire dungeons or blocking off crucial gathering locations. This news thrilled him. He anticipated nothing short of complete success. The task was so effortless it bordered on tedious, but he still requested a status report. Everything was progressing flawlessly. Abel's team was currently securing the Unicorn territories. By dominating the area, they guaranteed that Claus and the other lower-level failures had no chance of ever achieving a rank advancement. He had even gone so far as to employ mercenaries to eliminate every low-level dungeon surrounding the city. Only the most intense challenges remained, even for beginners. He believed the weak had no place among their ranks, as they only detracted from the prestige of true adventurers. Glenn concurred that this assessment was a complete sham. He even confessed to using his time-stop ability just to pry into Claus's inventory. He had believed he was only there to sabotage Claus, but his partner brushed off the boy as a mere obstacle in their way. Their real mission was to ensure only the elite succeeded. They were creating a legendary trial that only the best could endure. Glenn found it amusing, unconcerned with whether the guild leader became enraged by their interference. As it stood, the only ones still in contention were their own ally and the pathetic Claus, who, according to their informants, was currently heading north, trekking toward the perilous Shina Mountains. It was an arduous day's journey, and he smirked at Claus's naivety for assuming they had not already scouted the area. Once there, his main adversary would be the deadly environment itself. He would be completely at the mercy of Carmen, the master of weather manipulation. Even if he survived the cold, he still had to confront the mountain's ferocious apes that slaughtered anything in sight. Before they knew it, the two were fully encircled by the savage creatures. Unexpectedly, the monkeys began to back away. These were low-ranked monsters that became extremely aggressive when startled awake, which was precisely what this strange blizzard had done. The snow was out of season, and to Merem's astonishment, Claus realized it was artificial since the storm was contained to one specific zone. This was the doing of Carmen, who had the power to manipulate the weather. Though her reach was typically limited, she had been impressive 3 years prior. But now she was capable of conjuring an entire blizzard. However, Claus had also evolved and he immediately activated his system. In just 20 minutes, he would obtain 5 caramel fruits, and in 2.5 hours, he would have 5 phantom nuts. They had no idea how powerful he had become, and his auto-gathering would operate regardless of the location. The only significant hurdle was the weather, as he was uncertain if he could withstand the region's severe cold. Despite the freezing temperatures, he knew he had to press on. Merrim was anxious and advised him to be cautious of frost and monkeys. Claus suggested Merrim turn back before things became truly dangerous. Reflecting on their brief time fighting together, he realized that having a reliable partner to share the burden was not a bad experience after all. But ultimately, his skill was for the solo path. That was where he truly excelled. Realizing Merrim could not keep up, Claus insisted she leave before using his auto-collection skill. As the snow swirled, Merrim covered his eyes. But when he looked up again, Claus had completely disappeared. Anxious, Merrim searched for him, hoping that Claus had not become trapped in the storm. Time passed, and Claus slowly opened his eyes to assess his surroundings. He was holding the 5 fruits he needed, and with plenty more nearby, he decided to harvest the rest for some additional profit. Suddenly, a distant sound gained his attention. He concentrated and spotted Merrim running toward him. Realizing he was being followed, Claus called him an idiot. The next collection took over 2 hours, and there was no way Merrim could keep pace. He activated his skill, and after the usual duration, his eyes snapped open. He was confronted with total darkness, unable to see in front of him. He wondered for a moment if he had misjudged the sunset until he felt the nuts he had gathered still in his hands. Then he remembered he carried stones that acted as magical lanterns. With the light restored, he could finally see his surroundings, only to discover that several monsters had already surrounded him. The creatures charged forward. Merrim arrived, staff at the ready. A light began to shine from her weapon, though a massive ravine lay between them. She shouted a warning about a creature lurking behind him. The real threat was right in front of him, forcing him to dodge Merrim's incoming magic. The spell whizzed past him, flying straight toward the monster. The creature took the hit and staggered from the impact. Merrim steeled his resolve, refusing to allow his friend to come to harm. He called out to Merrim in concern, but a roar from the beast made her tremble with fear. She urged Claus to flee immediately while she drew the monster's attention. The beast hoisted a tree trunk with one hand, a display of raw power that terrified him. The monster hurled the trunk at Merrim. The ensuing chaos sent him into the ravine. The fall was jarring and painful, though the snow cushioned his landing. He looked up to find himself still circled by deadly creatures. One of the beasts roared, and the others began to move. Claus watched in disbelief, realizing they were targeting the wizard instead of him. He landed a quick blow on one of the creatures, opening his system and expressing his annoyance at being overlooked by the monsters. The first option he saw was auto-return, but he'd reserved that for when he was alone. These creatures were at least mid-rank, much stronger than him, yet he was not going to abandon his companion. He placed himself protectively between the monsters and Merrim. He chose to activate an auto-battle, predicting a victory over the 8 monsters in just over 10 minutes. He would not allow them to harm Merrim, telling her to simply wait for exactly 10 minutes and 28 seconds. They were not friends, after all. And even though adventurers were free to choose their own paths, Claus was determined not to let the woman die. With his sword in hand, he pledged to take care of everything within that 10-minute span. Meanwhile, Merrim observed him, utterly perplexed. The blizzard was so strong she had to shield her eyes. And when she looked back, Claus had disappeared. She panicked briefly, not knowing where her protector had gone. The creatures became restless, seeking him out. These smaller yetis specialized in stealthy assassinations and were known for being aggressive. Merrim saw them beginning to blend into the snow. The moment they became most dangerous was when their threat level jumped from beginner to medium. Far away, inside a secluded cabin, a young woman used her sharp hearing to listen. She heard the yeti's war cry and the sounds of Claus's struggle. She smiled at the sound, pleased that her deception had worked, and asked for the fire to be stoked to fight off the cold. In her mind, it was checkmate. Once those beasts picked up the scent of prey, they never gave up the hunt. She did not care how this fit into the larger plan. Her jealousy toward Claus was all that mattered. She was consumed by envy and reveled in the fact that he would not make it through the night, wishing he would simply vanish forever. In the midst of the falling snow, the observer watched everything play out. Everyone had disappeared, leaving only the chilling cries of the yetis. He feared Claus had already become their meal. Suddenly, one beast's throat was slashed, and it fell to the ground lifeless. The remaining monsters frantically searched the area, hunting for the young boy. They huddled together, sensing a deadly predator nearby. Just as Claus's silhouette appeared behind one, the creature let out a final agonizing roar as Claus took down another. Blood splattered as another corpse hit the ground. The observer was terrified. Claus was even stealthier than the yetis themselves. He was killing these muscular titans with single blows, catching them off guard. One beast thought it had found its target, but it was just a leaf fluttering near where the boy was hiding. The snowbank was suddenly destroyed, forcing him to move immediately if he wanted to survive. It was just a plant, a decoy. Both the beast and the boy realized they had fallen for a skillfully crafted distraction. Claws emerged from the snow with deadly precision, and just like that, another creature fell. Seeing him up close, the boy noticed a terrifying change in Claws' presence. He was now certain this boy was destined for legendary greatness. His intuition practically screamed. Only one beast remained, and it was smart enough to realize it needed to flee before it ended up in a grave alongside its pack. But its escape was cut short as a sword was plunged deep into its chest. Claws had been lying in wait the whole time, perfectly hidden beneath the frost. The hunt was over. As a monster died, Claws absorbed its experience. Massive influx caused him to level up multiple times, and finally his eyes slowly began to open. Everything was dark, but a faint voice started calling in the distance. Slowly, Claws opened his eyes again. He felt something soft in his grip and realized he was holding a loaf of bread. Just as a girl's voice called him Big Brother, she playfully scolded him, telling him he shouldn't play with his food. Dazed and confused, he looked out the window, shocked to find himself at home. He had no memory of using auto-return, but Liz confirmed he had eliminated all 8 enemies in just 10 minutes and 20 seconds. Immediately after the final kill, his body had succumbed to the freezing exhaustion, sending him into a deep slumber in the snow. Still clutching the bread, he weakly asked if he had finally reached paradise, but his sister told him he was mistaken. Annoyed, she snapped at him to stop crushing the bread. He was convinced she was an angel destined for heaven until the dream began to fade and he started to wake up. He felt something soft in his hand again. It turned out he had been squeezing someone in his sleep, but as his vision cleared, he realized this was not his sister, and something felt very off. He had no idea where he was or who this mysterious person could be. As the girl sat up, she asked if Claws was finally awake, but his eyes immediately drifted toward her chest. Visibly uncomfortable, she demanded he look away, though Claws insisted it was purely an accident. The girl begged him to stop staring and, in a fit of embarrassment, hurled a boot directly at his face. He tried to collect his thoughts, still reeling from the aftermath of that brutal, bloody battle. It turned out his savior was a girl with striking features, which surprised him. He noticed his hands were wrapped in heavy bandages, explaining why they had felt sewn him earlier, but now the pain was beginning to throb. The girl told him to stay still, explaining that his limbs were severely frostbitten and he had been only moments away from freezing to death. It was just as he had seen in his dreams. She had dug a hole in the snow to stay warm, though she quickly insisted he not get the wrong idea. Claws then realized she was the one who had initially protected him. If she did not step in, he would have stopped breathing entirely. She brushed it off, stating that helping each other out was what friends were supposed to do. Claws gave a terse thanks, but mentioned it was still debatable whether they were actually friends. She called him stubborn as Claws, unsure how to treat a girl as a friend, awkwardly nudged a pile of snow. With the air cleared, they both finally left their temporary shelter. He wondered why she bothered with someone like him, but she said her unique skill had driven her to do it. Her intuition alerted her at key moments, guiding her to victory versus the skeletons and helping her locate him in the dark. She felt he was someone special, but they needed to move quickly since the exam was ending soon. He cautioned her not to regret this, since their final plan was very difficult and needed to start right away. Their targets were ghouls, slow, but very strong undead monsters with tough bodies and a craving for human flesh. These creatures had a few forms and were known to show up just about anywhere. Claws thought hunting them was the only way to get enough points to pass the exam. As they rode in a carriage, she wondered if this plan would actually work. Most nearby monsters were supposed to have been purified, so there should not be any left in the area. Claws clarified that only the weak threats had been removed. His real targets were the mid-level ghouls or higher. She said his plan was reckless, but he replied that hunting other monsters would be even harder. His skill showed only 8 hours remained and they would not reach other targets in time. The utility she thought was impressive. This gamble was the only real chance they had left to pass. She joked that his skill was like a cheat code and said he should sell information, but he replied that her intuition was just as impressive. There was one issue. His skill only worked on monsters he had fought before, and since he had never fought a mid-level ghoul, he wondered if she was still in. She said yes, and they immediately sped off toward the catacombs of the old church to go faster. He added a 40% speed boosting potion to the donkey's feet. He told her not to fall out of the carriage, but she confidently said that was impossible with his ability activated. The system precisely calculated their arrival time to be 3 hours and 24 minutes. In swift moments, they arrived at the church, and he was buzzing with excitement for the mission to finally be over. Though he did not know the dungeon's exact layout, he knew it had never been purified before. The Peered Gain had not made a move there yet, and purifying the area was impossible without first finding the floor boss. Suddenly, he realized Marin was not there and began to panic, thinking she might have fallen off somewhere along the road. However, he soon found her hiding under his cloak, hugging him tight while insisting she had not been panicked for even a split second. She claimed the ride had been perfectly smooth and that even the river crossing had not fazed her. After she composed herself, the pair paid the copper fees and entered the gloomy catacombs. They made sure to rent a lantern to help guide them through the darkness. Mara maintained that she was not scared, despite her obvious discomfort with dark, moldy ruins. But before she could finish her thought, Claus pulled a prank and thoroughly scared her. Fuming, she tried to take a swing at him before they eventually continued their trek through the corridors. As they headed down the stairs, he asked how much she knew about the dungeon, but she admitted she was completely unfamiliar with the place. Once they reached the 6th floor, they encountered a very strange-looking door. He peeked through a small window to see that the coast was clear before pushing the door open. According to rumor, this dungeon existed long before the city, and the church was built on top of it in hopes of purifying the ancient evil. The abyss beneath the church stretched deeper than anyone realized. While the upper floors had been cleared, the lower levels had become a breeding ground for something far worse. The church occasionally hired adventurers to deal with the problem. Seals had been placed on every door to keep the horrors contained, and that detail alone was enough to leave Mara deeply unsettled. She asked Claus if he shared her dread, and he responded with something far less reassuring than she had hoped. He warned her that if a monster broke loose, she was to immediately abandon him and run. Mara was taken aback and asked if he was joking. His expression made it clear he was not. He explained that his unique ability allowed him to return home safely, but only when he was alone. He told her he was truly grateful she had saved him and that he refused to let her die on his account, which was why he was practically begging her to listen. She gave a small smile, privately deciding he was just trying to act cool. It was admittedly a very committed performance. Even so, her intuition had already begun signaling that something was closing in. She told herself she had to get him out before the real risk arrived. Reinvigorated, Claus said he was counting on her as they reached the 10th floor, which marked the true beginning of the dungeon. Their primary targets were the ghouls, and the plan was to pick off weaker ones using stealth. Beyond a massive staircase on the 15th floor, a bat fluttered past carrying a mysterious letter, and nearby, a girl sat calmly sipping tea. This was Mika Kisaragi, a special forces member who commanded an elite army of puppets. A stern warning was etched into the door ahead, demanding it remain sealed once they crossed the threshold. They ignored it and pushed through, and both were instantly stunned by what waited on the other side. The entire chamber was crawling with vengeful ghosts. Claus was thrilled, since the sheer number of spirits far exceeded anything he had anticipated. Mara, on the other hand, was paralyzed with fear. Her intuition was screaming like an alarm bell inside her head, and she realized the place was far more lethal than she had bargained for. Despite the terror, they prepared to initiate their plan. Gripping a bone, Claus took cover behind a pillar and crept deeper into the room, while Mara waited on the other side of the dungeon door and mentally reviewed their strategy. Claus would act as bait, luring a lone bull toward Mara before using his ability to escape if things went south. Their objective was to draw the beast out of the dungeon and into the designated safe area, where Mara would emerge from a pile of corpses to launch a stealthy ambush. She made no secret of how much she hated the hiding spot. Claus insisted the tactic was necessary. Since the path ahead was a death trap, the safe zone was essential, which made her role absolutely vital. She warned him that if she was truly that essential, he had better stay on her good side. With that settled, they were finally ready to begin the operation. By any reasonable measure, it was an extremely normal plan. Even as they started, however, a lingering sense of dread continued to gnaw at Mara. She urged Claus to be careful, telling him that her instincts felt like a grim reaper was standing right behind her. The chill intensified, and when she slowly turned around, a creature was lurking in the dark. Panic took hold as she realized a monster had invaded what was supposed to be a guaranteed safe zone. The creature locked eyes with her and immediately charged. Desperate to survive, she lunged at the beast, but it deflected her attack as though it were nothing. Watching her best effort brushed aside so easily only deepened her despair. Unaware of the chaos outside, Claus continued his cautious advance through the dungeon, confused by the silence. High above, monsters were silently watching his every move. His level 3 presence detection triggered just as a pack of ghouls dropped from the ceiling. He drew his sword and braced for impact. He managed a point-blank strike, but his blade shattered instantly against the creature's hide. The ghoul remained entirely undamaged. Another hit sent Claus staggering back. These were not average enemies. They were advanced threats, and they didn't appear on his list of creatures at all. His ability only tracked recognized dangers. If it worked on everything, even tossing a small stone would be a godlike power, which was not quite how it functioned. Now unarmed, he felt helpless. Mara hurried to his side, apologizing that she had failed to secure a safe way out. She told him her instincts were telling her this was not the end, which meant there was still a way to survive. That was either encouraging or wishful thinking, and they did not have time to decide which. Claus stood straight, filled with new resolve. However, the situation was still dangerous. They were surrounded, with one ghoul blocking the front and two more advancing from behind. Suddenly, Merrim's danger sense went off and she pulled Claws back as another ghoul crashed through the wall like a speeding train, smashing everything in its path. They were now up against 4 elite enemies. One ghoul began ripping the surroundings apart with blade-like arms. Another crushed rocks with its bare hands. One of them easily lifted a huge rock and threw it far away, as if it weighed nothing. That demonstration of brute force left them both shaking. They stayed hidden and unable to decide what to do. Then Claws noticed a hand harpoon nearby and quickly grabbed it. He quietly said that he was maybe a little too familiar with dangerous situations, which, given the circumstances, seemed like a reasonable observation. Merrim pointed toward their intended route of escape, only to see it completely blocked by the rock the ghoul had thrown. The situation had become critical. Even without being attacked right away, the tension was unbearable, and Merrim was certain she looked like a more appealing meal than Claws. It urgently needed a plan. Going back would take more than 100 hours, and Merrim explained clearly that she would not be able to keep up that pace. Claws could not start his auto-battle mode yet. Claws admitted that his earlier strike on the ghoul had done no damage, a revelation that frightened her. All the same, Claws noticed something, a thinner, more fragile area of skin on one of the ghoul's hands. He figured that even a small cut might be enough. He also saw a burn mark on the ghoul's palm, and Merrim confirmed it had been made when the ghoul blocked her fireball. They looked at each other and came to a silent understanding together. Ghouls were known to be vulnerable to fire. No matter how great their strength, a weakness was still a weakness. Still scared, Merrim asked if Claws was truly ready. Despite her fear, she stepped out from hiding, made a new fireball, and launched it straight at the ghoul's back. Claws charged right after the flames, and timing his move perfectly, pushed the tip of his harpoon into the center of the flames. The force of the attack passed through the weapon and set it on fire. As the ghoul struggled to defend against the fireball, Claws landed a devastating blow. The system then calculated the odds, estimating 24 minutes to defeat the remaining 4 enemies. Claws asked Merrim to wait exactly 24 minutes and 13 seconds. This surprised her. Before, he had needed only 10 minutes to deal with twice as many enemies. Even though the number was cut in half, the time needed had doubled. She noticed this, looking noticeably uneasy. Claws activated auto-battle mode, leaving Merrim worried because he no longer had a proper weapon. Completely surrounded, he reacted with incredible speed, blocking a deadly blade, grabbing one ghoul's arm, delivering a powerful kick to another, and using his cloak to confuse the third. The display was so overwhelming that Merrim was speechless. In the chaos, one ghoul was accidentally cut open by its own comrade. Claws moved with precise fluidity, forcing the monsters to turn their blades on each other. 24 minutes still on the clock, he remained trapped in the center of the fight. The bladed ghoul attacked fiercely, but Claws dodged every swing with perfect timing. He blocked a blade with his bare hands just as another monster saw an opportunity to attack from the side. He grabbed the attacker, redirected its momentum, and forced it to accidentally kill its own ally. He then grabbed the creature's remaining arm, twisted it hard, and slammed it into the dirt. Seeing an opening, a huge ghoul charged forward. Claws used the ghoul already in his grip as a human shield, and the creature took the full force of the blow to the face. With a single brutal strike, Claws cut off one of the monster's heads. Of the 4 that had initially cornered them, only 2 were left standing. Even though they were mindless creatures, their faces now showed clear shock and terror. Watching from her hiding place, Merrim's expression mirrored theirs. She was in complete disbelief. Regular weapons had been useless against their hides, but Claws had realized he could use the monster's own strength against them. It was a dangerous plan that no smart warrior would have tried. It was, without a doubt, something that only Claws could have managed. She prepared to move, to get as far away as possible and find a way to escape while he kept their attention. Reinforcements could arrive at any moment, and his auto-battle skill was quickly reaching its limit. It was a sound plan, but Merrim was clearly worried by the risk he was taking for her sake. Sensing her concern, he simply gave a confident smile and thanked her. He told her they were not in a life-or-death situation yet, and that he trusted her instincts. Now, he said he just needed her to start trusting herself, too. Despite everything, the anxiety lingered. After his prior triumph, Claws was out cold for a whole night, and these adversaries were much more dangerous than any they had previously encountered. She consented to smooth the way, fervently wishing he would not push himself beyond the breaking point. She silently promised that should he lose consciousness again, she would be the one to drag him from this area. She needed to take action before her premonition became a tragic truth. Returning to the thick of things, only a single ghoul stood between Claws and the battle's conclusion. With only 14 seconds remaining on his ability, he readied himself to end it. The ghoul, enraged, pounced right at him. Just as before, Claws barely evaded the wild attack. The being made a reckless charge, its jaws packed with incredibly sharp teeth. Those lethal fangs aimed directly for Claws' throat. He dodged, being ripped apart by the monster. While evading, he slipped on a stone block, but he quickly steadied himself and got back on his feet. Noticing his stumble, the ghoul attacked again, but Claws already had his hand on his weapon. He calmly waited for the monster to come within striking distance. The pair were on a collision course, and the ghoul did not realize Claws was far from defenseless. With a single quick movement, he beheaded the monster as his time ended. The inanimate body tumbled across the floor. Claws coughed up blood from the intense strain and fell down in exhaustion. Elsewhere, Marim's instinct began to shriek. A sudden coldness activated her extrasensory perception for a brief moment, so powerful that she paused and glanced back with deep worry. A life-threatening danger was approaching, hidden either behind her or somewhere underfoot. She instantly turned around and dashed down the passageway, only to discover a new group of ghouls appearing to cut off her route. Meanwhile, Claws lay helpless on the chilly ground, completely drained. He succeeded in drawing out a top-tier potion and drinking it. Appreciative of his foresight, he remembered the suggestion that had led him to acquire it. Understanding the gold coin had been the finest investment he had ever made, he now confronted 4 huge ghouls with the situation rapidly getting further out of hand. They thought about falling back, but as Claws turned to leave, a loud crash echoed through the chamber. The exit had been sealed. He stared at it, sensing a peculiar uneasiness. He could detect movement on the opposite side and shouted out, hoping it was Marim. He quickly realized, however, that a far larger number of beings were lurking behind that entrance than one person could account for. The enormous size of the oncoming force caught him entirely off guard. A voice taunted him from the other side, clarifying that the doorway was impervious to ghouls and that his skills were clearly not good enough. Claws then came face to face with a woman being carried by a group of monsters. She gave a playful smile, and he immediately recognized that well-known voice. It was Mika, one of the top members of the Special Forces. She shook her finger in disapproval and informed him he had no permission to address her so informally. At her order, the creatures surged forward and encircled him, eliminating all possibility of escape. He could not determine exactly what they were, but he knew they were not normal zombies or ghouls. Then he recalled her skill. She had the ability to breathe life into inanimate matter and control it at will. He remembered her mentioning 3 years earlier that she favored puppets in human form, but these were not dolls. She had twisted the corpses around into her own minions, and they now acted as her personal protectors, using the remains of the fallen as sustenance. Claws realized Mika's wrongdoings were facing the heavy hand of justice. Ghouls became stronger when nourished with human remains, and she had given them plenty. Horrified, he asked if she had truly fed innocent people to the ghouls simply to strengthen them. She coldly confirmed it, admitting the monsters he had fought earlier were her own twisted creations. To her, the victims had been nothing more than discarded husks, and she informed him that soon Claws would join their ranks as another mindless corpse. She mocked him, declaring that the dungeon would become his eternal resting place. Her initial idea had been to allow the ghouls to finish him off, making his death appear as a regrettable accident during the test. But after everything he had accomplished, she decided it was simpler to overwhelm him with sheer numbers. That obvious contempt for human life sent Claws into a mindless rage. He realized that this was no longer just a challenging test. They were actively trying to eliminate him. Mika disclosed that his death would get her a huge reward from her mysterious benefactor. Claws was not going to die in a hole like this. He finally enabled his auto battle mode and spoke to the souls of the dead, asking them to endure for just 5 more minutes as he prepared to free them from her control. Surrounded and pushed to his limit, he activated his skill to destroy Mika's puppets once and for all. Mika's power was life manipulation. She was able to breathe life into inanimate items, theoretically enough to animate half the planet. Anything she controlled gained a substantial increase in power, and the more humanoid the shape, the more effective her ability became. Claws clearly remembered their simulated battle from 3 years ago, but he had been utterly humiliated by a puppet that barely reached his knees. Her power had since reached a completely different degree of deadliness. With 49 bodies supported by her ability, she was sure he would not survive the attack. To her, he was just an arrogant weakling who deserved to be eliminated. Using the blades he had salvaged, however, Claws carved through the horde, sending heads flying with merciless effectiveness. He had already destroyed 12 of them in moments. Witnessing the carnage, Mika broke out in a sweat. She had never conceived of him being this skilled. He aimed his blade at her and advanced through the puppets that were still standing, plunging her into despair. Eager to stop him, she instructed her archers to unleash a volley of arrows meant to kill. Claws weaved through the projectiles with effortless grace. She was angered that a man with what she saw as a useless skill was not only still alive, but dominating the field of battle. He tore through the ranks, claiming more heads with every swing. The display of raw power left her stunned and humiliated. Claws stood his ground while blood trickled from Mika's nose in shock. She could not understand being overwhelmed by someone with such a pathetic ability. Seeing her own blood staining her clothes felt like the ultimate insult. She slammed her hand onto the ground in a rage and consumed by hatred, vowed to finish him. She was a level 100A rank adventurer, and there was no doubt in her mind she was going to kill him then and there. She no longer cared about making it look like an accident or about being labeled a criminal. She was backed by Gain, a man from an incredibly influential family who could make any problem disappear. She did not even care about Gain's personal goals. With enough money, anything was possible. As long as they controlled the capital's guild, everyone would fall in line. They held all the power, and Claus was destined to die before ever reaching the rank of a mid-tier adventurer. Even if he begged for mercy, she would cast him aside and trample him without a second thought. She ignored his movements as Claus continued evading her relentless onslaught, tearing through the remaining puppets and finally clearing the field. And his time ran out, and he snapped his eyes open. He looked up at her from the ground and asked, in a remarkably conversational tone, whether she had said something while he was out. She stood in silence, completely baffled as to how he had managed to dodge her and dismantle her puppets so effortlessly. 3 years ago, he had believed he could never hope to surpass her. Now it felt too easy, and his body did not feel the slightest fatigue. Looking back, he realized he might have actually overestimated her abilities. She trembled with outrage at the thought of being seen as inferior to him. She recalled Gain once said that skills were strictly categorized by their specific power levels. His own skill was legendary, a hero-class ability fit for a king. He believed Mika possessed similar potential and hoped she would meet his high expectations. She gritted her teeth in a blind fury, unable to accept that someone she considered inferior was looking down at her. In response, she commanded her puppets on the lower floors to awaken. As they reanimated, a massive door loomed before him, beyond which lay a grave danger marked by a warning that strictly prohibited entry to anyone below S rank. Mika commanded her puppet to unseal the gates. Suddenly, a massive hand crushed the puppet. From the shifting shadows, Claus sensed a sinister presence emerging. While he struggled to grasp the situation, Mika began to laugh. She blamed his arrogance for the outcome, claiming his skill had forced her to use a forbidden trump card. She taunted him, asking whether he knew the real reason the dungeon had never been purified. The answer was that the boss had been far too powerful to defeat, necessitating it be sealed behind a reinforced door. Behind that seal, ghouls had devoured one another in an endless cycle until only the strongest remained. The evolved monstrosity that had survived, the demon ghoul, was now breaking free. Claus stood frozen in terror as the beast's presence filled the room. He demanded to know what she was doing, but Mika only jumped for joy. She explained that she had placed puppets at every exit, and once all the doors were open, the ghoul would follow the scent straight to him. She then revealed a pendant and declared that he alone would be devoured while she escaped the dungeon unscathed. The amulet, a gift from Gain, was designed to repel the undead and keep her perfectly safe. With that divine protection, she believed she was completely untouchable. She failed to notice the hairline crack forming until the amulet shattered. Both of them stared at it in stunned silence. It had not been part of anyone's plan. Meanwhile, a furious Maram blasted through the horde outside with her fireballs. Desperate to reach Claus, she finally forced the massive door open and screamed his name in a panic, desperately trying to warn him of the shadow looming behind him. But it was too late. The demon ghoul was already there, its mouth dripping with saliva at the sight of its next meal. Claus turned slowly to face the towering, bloodthirsty nightmare and let out a scream of pure terror. The creature uncoiled a massive serpentine body that made the very earth tremble beneath its weight. It let out a thunderous roar, radiating a level of pure malice. It froze the humans in their tracks. Claus stared in shock, trying to make sense of what kind of nightmare the demon ghoul truly was. It was clear the monstrosity operated on a completely different level than anything he had ever encountered. Using auto battle was out of question. One wrong move meant instant death. Maram frantically urged him to flee. In stark contrast to their panic, Mika stood nearby with a sinister, confident smile. She had briefly worried that Gain had scammed her with a fake amulet, but those doubts had apparently vanished. Fine shimmering threads began to sprout from her fingertips and bind the beast, revealing her secret technique. She mockingly asked Maram whether Claus was a friend, referring to Maram as a girl. Mika corrected her sternly, clarifying that they were actually a boy with feminine features. Mika scoffed, declaring that Trash's companions were just as worthless. She taunted Claus, asserting he was too weak to even grasp the disparity in their abilities. Her power granted her manipulation over any life form she created. If a monster consumed her creations, she would gain total command over it. Claus watched in terror as the full implications of her twisted ability became clear. Since the demon ghoul had devoured her puppets, the massive creature was now her personal and utterly obedient toy. While she couldn't control beings stronger than herself, her command over this one was absolute. With nothing in the dungeon exceeding her own level of 117, she was essentially a god in this oppressive place. Now that they understood the arrangement, she decided it was time to execute them both. She told them to feel honored, explaining that her secret allowed her clan to smuggle monsters into places they were never meant to be, or simply force them into cold-blooded murder. Merrim's intuition flared as she felt a deadly strike approaching. Then the situation changed. The beast struck Mika with a devastating blow. As she was crushed, the terrifying realization dawned on her. Its level far surpassed her own. The arrogant woman was sent flying through the air, crashing through walls. As the ghoul's attention shifted to Claus, he stood utterly paralyzed by a sense of impending doom. Before him was an SS-ranked nightmare, a level 208 monstrosity. Merrim screamed for him to run and never look back. And whatever happened, she asked him to maintain absolute faith in her. Claus glanced back at his friend, who was struggling to breathe. As he moved closer, he noticed she was pointing her magic directly at him. He told himself there was no way he could be her target. Confused and hesitant, he decided to place his life entirely in her hands. Merrim responded with a broad, confident smile. She prepared to expend every last bit of her remaining mana. It was time for her strongest technique, the fastest and most powerful in her arsenal. A maximum output, full-power fireball. Claus was now trapped between a searing inferno and an enraged ghoul. He sprinted forward without pause, his eyes squeezed shut in a desperate leap of faith as she poured every ounce of her remaining magic into the final attack. The ghoul unhinged its jaw, desperate for a kill. Claus sprinted blindly through the chaos until his foot caught on an obstacle. He had no idea what made him tumble toward the floor. As he lost his balance, his blade swung upward and perfectly intercepted the passing fireball. The impact ignited a bright flash of light that completely blinded the ghoul. Disoriented by the flash, Claus heard a sharp slicing sound as Merrim reached out and pulled him back. The ghoul lost its footing and slammed heavily into the stone wall. Its snapping jaws narrowly missed them as they scrambled to the safety of the doorway. The creature lashed out using its tongue, trying desperately to snatch them. They both recoiled in pure horror. Merrim screamed at him to slam the door while the monster remained jammed in the frame. Together, they fought to force it shut, but the ghoul's face was stuck firmly in the opening. Their intense efforts eventually proved successful, and the heavy door finally clicked shut. They listened as the ghoul's furious screeches echoed from beyond, the sound paralyzing them until a heavy silence descended. Trembling, they glanced through the peephole. The ghoul was nowhere to be seen. The monster had retreated. Merrim took a breath, noticing her intuition no longer detected any immediate danger. Flooded with relief, she embraced him, then pulled away in utter embarrassment once she understood what she was doing. It was a completely normal reaction to almost being devoured, and neither of them spoke of it again. Eventually, the initial mission to gather the jaws had been a total failure. Merrim grimaced at the taste of a magic restorative potion, which tasted absolutely disgusting. However, they had managed to grab the demon ghoul's jaw, which had dropped after the creature attempted to breach the magic seal. That gave them all 5, completing the task. Claus pointed out a significant issue, though the others were trapped on the far side, and the door was now completely impassable. Merrim inquired what the bag looked like. He described a medium-sized round sack. They quickly understood he had not simply stumbled. He had kicked the bag that held the jaws. Both of them were admittedly quite pleased about this. Merrim asked why he was staring at the sword and if he intended to return for Mika. Claus admitted that would be a suicide mission. Instead of dwelling on it, Merrim observed that Mika was not one to give up easily. Someone as stubborn and unpleasant as her, she reasoned, would not offer them the satisfaction of dying so quickly. This was either a solid tactical assessment or a very optimistic one, but it served well enough. Meanwhile, the ghoul was prowling around searching for its next meal. It roared furiously, and Mika realized she was being hunted. A voice from above called her reckless for trying to fight high-level ghouls alone. Tiara descended and rescued her, bluntly stating she was being incredibly foolish. Mika snapped back, arguing that she was an earring hunter, not luggage to be carried around. The elf dropped her slightly and asked if she would prefer to be abandoned, reminding her that she was currently a suspect, not an adventurer. The elf revealed she had been working as a spy for the guildmaster and had only been shadowing Claus to ensure his safety. She was unsure what past he shared with Mika's group, but she had known they would appear eventually, as they had been operating within the guild's territory. She warned Mika to prepare herself, because they were about to expose every secret. As for Claus, she observed that his luck was a genuine mystery, unlucky enough to keep encountering monsters, yet somehow consistently alive. She decided she would offer him her congratulations for the day's results. At this rate, she added, failing the exam seemed almost inevitable. With time running short, Merrim suggested taking a shortcut, hitching a ride on Claus's back to reach their destination. That day, a chilling sound of pure resentment carried throughout the whole city. The origin was the church, which was also the hidden entrance to the catacombs. Deep inside, the creature continued to roar in a fit of primal anger. Everyone who heard it wondered what the sound was. The general consensus was that it sounded like something that had no business being above ground, even within the Adventurers Guild. The members experienced a strong sense of unease. Although the origin remained unknown, they traced it to the church on the outskirts of the city. The sound gave the receptionist a sinking feeling. She suspected Gain and his associates were causing the disturbance. Meanwhile, Gain stood by a window wearing a fiendish smirk. Even his own companions were visibly frightened by the haunting sounds echoing from a distance. He reassured them, explaining the noise was coming from the church where Mika had been at work. He was desperate to understand what she had done, noting that the surrounding mana felt like an S-rank dungeon. The atmosphere was suffocating. His companions concluded she must have performed a forbidden, high-risk ritual. Gain was unconcerned about the consequences as long as their goal was achieved. The mercenaries warned she had gone too far. He dismissed this, noting it was almost amusing how much she had complained before finally leaving. Her task had been to create powerful monsters, and she had been promised a generous bonus for her success. His only regret was not giving her a recording artifact, as he would have loved to witness the carnage firsthand. His companions outside wondered aloud if he had finally become insane. Gain stepped out for some fresh air, leaving the others to speculate about his history with claws. One suggested the tension likely arose from a particular past incident. Not a guess, she explained, but a suspicion she had held for a long time. It had all begun 3 years prior when Claws left the team, despite the significant effort Gain had invested in recruiting him. At the time, Gain had pretended not to care, claiming Claw's abilities were as mediocre as his spirit. But there was one final detail about that day that was considerably harder to dismiss. Gain had shown off a poisoned art, a legendary assassination tool that never missed and rendered its target unconscious within 10 minutes. To prevent any interference, he had activated his time stop ability. While time was frozen, he had prepared his auto return item and most importantly, struck a strange pose for the long journey home. His aim had been to observe the target succumb to the effects of the poison precisely 10 minutes after the strike. Yet, as he prepared to launch the dart, it slipped from his grasp, spiraling upwards. The lethal object then plummeted straight back towards his own hand. He began thrashing about in a frenzy, having poisoned himself while his time stop ability remained in effect. One of the group thought Claws must have countered the ability. She corrected him, clarifying it was simply Gain's own epic failure. The fabled weapon that was famed for never missing had, indeed, missed its intended recipient completely, striking its owner instead. Everyone concurred it was an error. The core issue was Gain's pride. He struggled to believe he could have missed with an infallible weapon. As someone obsessed with the supremacy of his own powers, he saw Claws as merely a pawn in a king's game. Logically, he reasoned, there was no way a king could be defeated by someone so insignificant. Each time Claws entered his thoughts, a faint sense of unease arose. He quickly reassured himself that Claws was likely dead by now and gazed out the window. Then he noticed Claws outside, casually riding his donkey. Of all the possible sights, this was by far the most unwelcome. It appeared impossible. Gain had been convinced that Mika's message meant Claws was destined to fall in the catacombs. Just as the thought occurred to him, the door swung open behind him, and a voice announced that the timing was perfect. Gain whirled around, his eyes wide. It was Mika, and she had immediate matters to discuss regarding the promotion exam. Only a few critical seconds remained. Claws opened his eyes. He stood before the reception desk, having returned with only seconds to spare. He breathed a sigh of relief, genuinely happy they had reached the goal in time. The donkey, seemingly unaware that the crisis had passed, immediately started causing a commotion, prompting the receptionist to snap that animals were prohibited inside. The head receptionist thanked all the participants for their involvement in the demanding promotion exam. She acknowledged the disorder that had taken place, apologized, and assured them that answers about the anomalies would be provided soon. While the area was being cleared, the scoring process for collected items began, and candidates lined up at the counter. With so few individuals remaining, was not expected to take more than 15 minutes. Merrim glanced at Claws and remarked that the exam was officially over, then asked why he remained standing there, appearing so calm. The requirements had been unambiguous. They needed to present at least 3 specific items from the list to pass, yet their entire collection consisted solely of some fruit and a few ghoul jaws. She quickly grasped that their limited collection was nowhere near sufficient for either of them to qualify. Claws remained confident and told her there was no reason to worry. He explained that auto collection would allow him to secure 2 of the items in just 5 seconds, and that if they acted quickly, they were guaranteed to obtain them from another source. Merrim grew uneasy, fearing he might inadvertently reveal their plans to someone nearby. He immediately clarified his intentions, stating firmly that he was not one to betray a secret. He referred to himself as a pacifist. Her memories of his recent actions suggested otherwise, but she let it go. He assured her they would not need to do anything risky, and gestured toward the side of the hall. Nearby, a shop was conveniently selling some of the very items they needed. Claus headed over, but returned disappointed due to the increased scrutiny after the exam. Prices had become outrageous. Merrim asked whether purchasing items was even permissible. Claus assured her that the rules only required acquiring the items, not defining the methods by which one hunted for them. She looked over what was available, including a rare baffle, and found herself in disbelief. Now that she possessed everything needed to pass, Claus offered her his congratulations and insisted she accept the items as a gesture of gratitude for her help in the mountains. He had hoped to purchase the gold jaws as well, but they were out of stock. Having already waited 3 years, he reasoned, one more would not be significant. The crowd was startled by a sudden resounding thud as Merrim punched Claus with considerable strength. She called him an idiot, her face reddening as she scolded him for his bluntness. She pointed out she had saved him in the mountains by sharing her body heat, a statement that led the onlookers to envision some very impure scenarios, creating a noticeable stir in the hall. She then huffed and declared she had already received more than enough from him. The other adventurers quickly recognized who they were watching. Merrim, the veteran who accidentally blasted his allies, and Claus, who carried the trauma of being exiled from her old party. She had saved them once, but in doing so had singed not just one person's hair but everyone's, and ignoring her intuition had only worsened things. Even so, Claus had never lost faith in her during the fight against the ghouls. Breaking through that mental barrier had clearly meant a great deal to her. Claus was visibly embarrassed by the blunt admission, but remained determined to let her keep the materials. Taking them back now, he decided, would not make him appear very kind. The two continued arguing in the middle of the hall. Tiara watched with second-hand embarrassment as someone nearby asked why they had not simply applied as a team. The rules, as initially laid out, stipulated that accumulated points would be distributed among team members, explaining why nearly every candidate had opted to create a team. These two, it seemed, had somehow overlooked that particular piece of instruction. Charlotte, a participant in game strategy, had already successfully completed the exam. The guild master, in the meantime, pressed Gain for a thorough justification. He had presented a reference from the capital's guild master as a weak justification for his involvement, and she cautioned that these actions, together with his attempts to undermine the exam, would not go unpunished. She instructed Tareen to join them in the interrogation room. She then presented a wooden artifact containing a recording demonstrating the capital's guild's activities in the area. This magical device was capable of capturing sound, and they had already taped compromising remarks from Gain's underlings, evidence considered admissible in court, making his predicament significantly more precarious. Gain, understanding that he desperately needed to get rid of the crystal, acted swiftly. However, the guild master revealed that this was a mere duplicate. The original had already been sent to the capital for analysis, leaving Gain to await whatever consequences were in store. He flew into a rage, desperately shouting for his father as he was being subdued. Baron Cashin appeared, declaring that even when things looked dire, the game was far from over. He commented that sensitive items should be delivered in person, and asked how the crystal had come into their possession. The group returned to the hall, completely drained. The receptionist began congratulating everyone who had made it through the promotion exam, and announced that licenses and a basic training session were scheduled for 2 o'clock that afternoon. She anticipated potential delays due to circumstances beyond her control. The candidates stayed where they were waiting. The clock eventually struck evening. Merrim was nearing her limit, her frustration escalating in tandem with her hunger. Having spent all their money on equipment, they had no money left over for sustenance and began to loudly express their displeasure. Objectively, this was the most undignified conclusion to a near-fatal dungeon adventure imaginable. In the midst of the grumbling, Merrim spotted a strange girl standing nearby. As it turned out, this girl was associated with Gain's team and was patiently awaiting delivery of a payment he had promised. She was, in fact, the very newest recruit Gain had alluded to earlier. She noticed Claus, Charlotte, introduced herself formally to them, and conveyed her gratitude for the chance meeting. She told them that she was drawn to him by his scent, explaining that she had an incredibly sensitive sense of smell. She confessed that she was fascinated with his aroma, and likened it to resilient grass that refused to be flattened, no matter how much it was trampled on. In her opinion, his presence was overwhelmingly stronger and more commanding than Gain's or anyone else's there. Making herself uncomfortably close, she suggested that they collaborate and become a team once they received their mid-rank licenses, and proudly adding that she had passed the exam solely through her own efforts. Merrim stood up and wanted to know what she was doing, telling her to stay away from Claus. The girl pointed out that Merrim also had a pleasant scent, though she pointed out that Merrim notably did not smell like a man at all. Merrim now looked to Claus for assistance. He paid no attention whatsoever to the unfolding situation. The situation stood out because, generally, every one of Gain's associates was top tier, and Gain himself had a mythical talent, a distinction that suggested he was more powerful than all of them put together. A deal had just been brokered to resolve the matter pertaining to Gain's team. resulting in a suspension of 3 months and a 500 gold fine. Thanks to Glenn's warnings regarding the guildmaster's worries, they had reacted quickly to apprehend the evidence. As far as they were concerned, anything short of complete success was absolute failure, the ruthless mentality that had positioned them at the summit. Baron Cashin peered out the window and noticed Claus and Merrim strolling together along the streets below. He recognized Claus from his previous time at the castle 3 years ago, and couldn't help wondering why he had left in the first place. He recalled the details included in Glenn's report. If the recorded achievements were accurate, then Claus wasn't simply impressive. He was, in the Baron's estimation, a monster in human form. Despite being just a beginner, his advancement to hero status seemed inevitable. The Baron decided to bring him over to his organization. His own son, in sharp contrast, was devoid of any real aptitude or instinct, a fact that triggered something akin to rage in the Baron. When they got to Claus's home, Merrim inquired about whether he had any family in the area. He mentioned his adorable younger sister, so Merrim inquired about who was cuter. Before he could respond, Merrim's survival instincts began blaring. She sensed that a threat was at hand, completely unaware that Liz had already been discreetly observing her through the window, clutching a knife. Liz welcomed Claus, mentioned that the exam had taken longer than expected, and asked whether he had been delayed because he was on a date. Merrim quickly corrected her, clarifying that she was, in fact, a boy. Liz's manner instantly shifted, becoming noticeably warmer. She invited both of them in, provided tea and snacks, and expressed her genuine pleasure to hear that he had actually passed the exam. Gleaming with pride, Claus revealed the official adventure badge he had recently been awarded. Liz offered a heartfelt congratulations on achieving what she considered a monumental accomplishment. After so many years, he had finally achieved the goal he had been striving for, and she said that she would make a large feast to celebrate his return. Merrim relaxed, realizing that despite her intensity, Liz seemed to be a marvelous sister. Liz thanked Merrim for being a loyal acquaintance to him, joking that his only companion had been an animal until now. She then asked Merrim whether there was anything she would like to eat. Merrim attempted to think of the proper words, but was unable to remember the dish's name. Claus recalled it being a cerulean stew, and wondered if Liz knew how to make it, adding that the sandwich spread he'd once shared with Merrim had tasted just like that dish. Liz responded that she knew the recipe well and started to cook. Merrim asked her to hold on, because they were missing some items. Claus left to get them, leaving a worried Merrim alone with Liz. As soon as he was gone, Liz said they needed to talk, just the two of them, girl to girl. Merrim said again that she was a boy. Liz said that her delicate frame said otherwise and got ready for their talk. Liz suggested Merrim take a nice bath. Merrim's eyes widened in excitement. Liz understood the difficulties of going on adventures without making a big deal of it. As Merrim got ready for her skill assessment, she said that success depended on both luck and hard work, then asked Liz if she had ever thought of becoming an adventurer. Liz responded that she had been inspired by her brother's stories and genuinely wanted to see the world. More than that, she wanted to be there for him during his adventures. Hearing this, Merrim began to think Liz might be a good girl. Maybe her initial thoughts were wrong about her. Liz followed up by saying she must stay close to him because the world would soon fall for Claus' charm, and wondered if Merrim agreed. Merrim was still worried. Liz then admitted she knew Claus knew Merrim's real gender. Otherwise, she said, he would not have left them alone. She then mentioned the night they had spent together, recalling how he had taken care of the twins while they slept. A moment later, Claus announced he was back. Liz grabbed his stick and asked him sternly what he had been doing. Caught off guard, Claus had trouble figuring out what was happening. Nearby, a huge legendary creature was trapped in chains. The group had already spotted the captive chain dragon, and it looked like they were going to be training hard for a while. Liz told her brother to kneel. She knew everything that had happened during the exam, including the deadly threats from the leeches and the ghouls. Despite promising he would avoid danger after the skeleton incident, he had still gone into the catacombs alone and unprotected, which he admitted as a punishment for his recklessness. She said he could not take any missions for an entire month. For those 30 days, he also had to focus on taking care of his sister as part of his punishment. She made her final decision. When Claus tried to argue, she asked tearfully if taking care of her was really such a chore. He replied that it was not a bad punishment really, but they still needed to make a living. She would not let him take any risks, but she compromised by only allowing zero-risk jobs, suggesting things like testing mattresses as the most dangerous thing she would allow. Merrim watched it all and knew that, despite the arguments, they worked well together. Feeling motivated, Claus talked with the guild receptionist about what kind of work he should be doing next. She playfully warned him not to underestimate the difficulty of the job she handled, noting it was the speech she usually gave to cocky adventurers. However, she had a special treatment request that seemed perfect for his skill set. Merrim was confused. The receptionist said that the guild's failure to properly watch the exam had put the examinees in danger. While she could not share the details, she said that their actions had saved the day. The Baron had been caught with the crystal recording, and even though he had tried to bargain for his son's release, the guild had too much evidence. The entire corrupt group had been disgraced and stripped of their power. The receptionist smiled quietly, looking satisfied. Because of them, a medium-sized guild had finally fought back against those rich troublemakers. She wished she could do more, but she wanted to thank them. She gave them a special request in a nearby city, a trip with all expenses paid where they could bring family. If Claus could just clear a water blockage, the reward was a 4-day, 3-night stay at a fancy hot spring resort. The springs were known for being medicinal and came in a wide, relaxing range. The official job was simple: clear the blockage and get the water flowing again. With the deal done, the group made it to the city. The mission met every demand his sister had made, which was either great planning or a big coincidence. Liz said she had not fully forgiven him, but her energy at the resort said otherwise. Claus commented that it had been a while since they had traveled together, noting they even had swimwear for the occasion. While checking out details regarding the resort, Liz spotted something that instantly piqued her interest: a mixed hot spring. Her thoughts started to run wild, although she kept them to herself. Her face made her general feelings obvious. Meanwhile, Merrim simply desired to unwind while soaking. The climate conditions were ideal, featuring a bright sky and 0 clouds. Liz reclined in the hot spring, relishing the moment. She felt especially appreciative since it felt as if they had the whole area to themselves. She wished Claus was able to be there too, though Merrim had made it apparent she would turn him to ash if he even tried stepping into the women's area. Men's spring was located further away, specifically to avoid such an occurrence from taking place anyway. Liz made sure of the arrangement by glancing down to where Claus was bathing and gave him away from above, which immediately made Merrim feel uneasy. Claus requested she use a quieter tone, careful not to bother anyone else there. Liz insisted nobody else was present. At that moment, her towel came loose. Claus was completely stunned by what he saw. Liz immediately called him a pervert as he frantically tried to apologize, even though the mishap was not really his responsibility in any meaningful way. On the second day of the getaway, Liz still felt intensely awkward about what had recently happened. The sole thing she truly regretted, she confided, involved her wishing her twins were only slightly larger in size. Claus seemed puzzled by this. Merrim told him to be more understanding. She then mentioned Claus had already seen Liz without clothes plenty of times while growing up, and to be honest, she had not noticeably changed since then. Regardless, he told her he still saw her as the most adorable girl alive, which came across as either heartfelt or the most carefully timed compliment ever. Did a decent job of smoothing things over. Liz claimed the flattery was a low blow, but appreciated kind words all the same. Annoyed, she promised that over the next 3 days, they would perceive her differently. She felt motivated to reveal her full potential. Merrim watched on, privately recognizing how peculiar both of them were. Now that they finished eating lunch, Claus got himself ready to go off and handle the task. Merrim volunteered to assist. However, he insisted the task was simple enough for one person to handle. He advised they split up, tasking her with a separate assignment, remaining behind to watch over his sister. Merrim groaned, yet accepted, figuring that she understood Liz better and that Claus would be fine on his own managing a simple water cleaning job. A group of girls were enjoying the water, Liz being one of them. Merrim crept up from behind her and used a classic knee stunt, creating an illusion of something risque floating around. Liz, she yearned to be treated as a developed adult. However, he kept on babying her. Merrim thought the entire thing was quietly sweet, despite being only a year older than Liz. She predicted that once Liz fully came into her own, her magnetism would be immense and possibly lead to major problems. Liz felt confused after hearing that statement. Merrim changed the subject to discuss her special gift, intuition. When it activated, she experienced a literal beeping sensation in her head. Her instincts had been heightened even before their arrival, explaining her insistence on sticking together. Liz questioned whether they were facing genuine danger. Merrim confessed she couldn't say for sure, only that her instincts were unfailingly accurate. Nonetheless, she felt certain that as long as Claus was with them, things would work out. In her view, he was the type of person who always delivered results. That declaration only worsened things for Liz, who was now overwhelmed by jealousy and desperately wanted to know Merrim's actual feelings for her brother. In the meantime, Claus journeyed into the heart of the forest. The weather could not have been better. Merrim's parting words lingered in his thoughts. She had sensed an ominous presence, not quite as malevolent as the catacombs, but reason enough to be cautious. He rationalized it as a simple cleanup. Just then, a massive log whizzed by, nearly hitting him. Ahead, several adventurers were embroiled in a messy battle with a massive slime. Claus observed the creature's size with clear disbelief. A girl came up to him, inquiring whether he was the adventurer assigned to guide the way to the water purification site. She warned him that the slimes in the area had grown enormous, making the task significantly more challenging than expected. She wasn't sure why the slimes had mutated, but mentioned it could be linked to the local bamboo flowering for the first time in 120 years. These things happened, she said. Some of the local adventurers recognized Claus as a well-known veteran rookie. They taunted him for taking 3 years to rank up, calling him Claus the Useless, which visibly annoyed him. Claus, however, didn't even recognize these individuals, which only fueled their anger. They instructed the rookies to deal with the slime swiftly. Claus agreed to finish it off. He handed his outer gear to the guide and approached the monster unarmed. The onlookers feared for his safety. The slime lunged to ensnare him, but he evaded its attack without any apparent effort. Without pausing, he plunged his bare hand deep into the gelatinous creature, located its weak point, grasped the internal core, and ripped it out in one smooth motion. As he crushed it, the slime immediately disintegrated into nothing. He faced the shocked onlookers and asked them to clean up the remains, explaining that even giant slimes died instantly if you removed the core by hand. It was a painful method. The injuries were easily treated with basic potions. Having spent so much time as a low-rank rookie, he had mastered these unconventional, tough tactics. He noted with a smirk that he'd never hunted a slime quite this large, but that compared to the monsters he had been fighting recently, it was child's play. Giant slimes were normally challenging encounters, often armed with dangerous special abilities. Standard procedure involved slowly chipping away at them until the core was visible. That at least was the textbook method that the adventurers who had mocked him had been trained in. Now they could only watch in silence as he dismantled the creature with his bare hands. The women in the group found themselves admiring his technique and wondering what else those hands might do. And the battered slime reached its breaking point and began radiating an intense pressurized aura. Claus, a veteran of these hunts, warned the others to brace themselves as thick steam poured out of the slime. It was a very bad sign. The girls scattered, but one of them tripped, leaving the group completely surrounded by the beast. The others managed to escape the fog and reached the safety of the clearing. Claus, however, welcomed the chaos. The thick mist ensured no one would witness his true capabilities in action. Within 25 minutes, silence was broken as a series of rapid, high-pitched sounds shattered the air. A volley of projectiles struck the slime, hitting the cores with precision and causing the sticky mass to implode. As the girls realized the monster had been defeated, they saw someone surfing on a makeshift board, balancing on the wood with complete ease. Claus held simple pebbles in his hands and was hurling them with deadly accuracy, picking off the remaining cores one by one. The girls could not comprehend what they were witnessing. Meanwhile, the other adventurers realized the slime was retreating toward the hot springs, floating in the water. Liz felt uneasy while Merrim's intuition began to tingle. Merrim sounded the alarm as a threat approached, causing Liz to panic as something lurked in the water beneath her. A slime lunged out and ensnared them both, sending the group into a panic. Claus intervened, though his rescue involved after the slime threat had been dealt with. Claus was lucky that only the two of them had been there, as a witness would have made things much worse. Eventually, Liz came to the conclusion that he needed a full-time babysitter and proclaimed, filled with resolve, that she was now officially becoming an adventurer herself. Their coach rolled onward until they went past a signpost showing they'd entered dungeon territory. Merrim requested an explanation, and Claus made it clear that the mountain range in their line of sight was a gathering of mid to high-level dungeons. One particular dungeon held a legendary dragon whose shadow was said to blanket the entire valley. Merrim was interested in visiting, but Claus cautioned that it was a considerable detour. Liz mentioned that the detour would take them directly to a city she had been wanting to explore, famed for its salamander steaks. Claus consented to the trip. Merrim observed their comfortable rapport. Upon reaching the base of the mountain, they discovered the path was blocked by enormous gates and fortified walls. Liz was confused that the gate was shut so close to the city. Claus fixed his gaze on the flag overhead and experienced a feeling of recognition. The guards halted them and questioned their purpose. Claus introduced himself as a mid-rank adventurer. The guard replied coldly that he was just following orders, and that any issues concerning the closure should be addressed to the Craw family. Liz recognized the name right away as the family that had once caused harm to her brother, and she was angered that they had the power to seize a public road. A strange girl showed up and clarified that given the family owned the dungeons, they were empowered to control the surrounding area. As the group stood in disbelief, the girl greeted Claus warmly and commented on how lucky it was to see him again after the exam. Charlotte sprang into his arms, declaring he had become stronger, and utterly bewildered, Liz needed to know who this girl was. Claus told her that they had both sat the adventurer examination together. Merrim remembered Charlotte well and recalled warning her to keep her distance from Claus. This attracted Charlotte's attention, and she skipped over happily, instantly beginning to sniff Merrim intently. She stated with satisfaction that she now recognized the distinct scent of a brat, making Merrim feel trapped and speechless. Following Merrim's objection, Charlotte steered the conversation to the matter of the dungeons. She verified that the magic stone mine belonged to the affluent Craw family, who had amassed their wealth by monopolizing these resources, and then used the profits to acquire vast additional territory, typically managed through the guilds for maximum profit. Given the mine was currently closed to the public, it was obvious they were hiding something inside. Charlotte disclosed that Gain had taken his elite members along with multiple mercenaries into the deepest section, leaving her with nothing to do. To occupy herself, she suggested combat training with claws. She was eager for entertainment and offered to exchange valuable information for spar. She was also keen to observe his skills firsthand, having heard his name often mentioned in relation to the dungeon incident. Merrim instantly started encouraging Claws to accept and prompted him to give Charlotte a solid thrashing. She presented it as an issue of critical intelligence, although it was also apparent she found Charlotte irritating. Gaining insight about Gain was a legitimate priority, given the stunt he had pulled during the exam. Equipped with wooden daggers, the two got ready. Liz wondered if Charlotte was genuinely powerful. Merrim wasn't completely sure. She had raised the question with Tareen, verified Charlotte was the real deal, closely observed throughout with no cheating. She was a combat prodigy whose abilities exceeded any typical novice by far. Liz was close to tears at the thought of her brother coming to harm. Charlotte retrieved a signaling device and placed a ball on the ground. The moment it hit the earth, it exploded into a huge cloud of smoke. The onlookers considered it a cheap trick. Charlotte didn't care about playing fair. Her one aim was to catch Claws completely off guard. Claws shielded his eyes, but the smoke was too thin to conceal her, and he spotted her charging through the haze. She should have been within his reach, but Charlotte suddenly disappeared, putting him instantly on high alert. Before he could respond, she had already materialized directly behind him, flickering out of existence at the last possible moment and reappearing in his blind spot to land a forceful blow. Claws managed to parry with his wooden dagger, but the weight of the impact sent him reeling. He regained his balance and kicked up sand to blind her. It only hit a mirage. The real Charlotte was already behind him once more. He narrowly dodged a fierce kick that shattered the ground where he had been standing. Charlotte allowed a small, impressed smile to appear. She was genuinely pleased that he had evaded her successive strikes so cleanly, noting that even at elite training facilities, few could react like that. Claws cautioned her not to underestimate years of solo survival. Merrim explained to Liz that given Claws had always fought alone, his situational awareness was essentially unparalleled. Having analyzed Charlotte's movements, Claws inferred that her ability must be linked to spatial manipulation. Out of the corner of his eye, he spotted a strange rift beginning to open. He explained the technique aloud, leaving the girls visibly impressed. Charlotte gave a smirk and stepped into the rift, vanishing completely. Grasping the technique, however, proved to be entirely different from countering it. She began circling him, leaving him disoriented by her constant movement. He had trouble keeping up with her pace, and a sudden attack made him lose hold of his dagger. She remarked mockingly that it had been surprisingly easy, then stopped, wondering if her instincts had misled her or if he was still holding back his full potential. Claws could see that she was operating at a totally different level. At this rate, the fight was basically over. As she moved in for the final blow, Claws intentionally tripped. As he fell, he managed to knock her arm away and push the blade away from his throat. In the scramble, he accidentally grabbed her, startling her. He tugged at her clothes. She delivered a swift kick, and they both tumbled into the dirt. Claws ended up in a somewhat awkward position. Charlotte, seeing how they were entangled, knew she had lost the fight. Liz and Merrim watched from the sidelines in stunned silence. Claws, for his part, was not sure how he had survived. Charlotte had been in control the whole time, using spatial gaps to attack from his blind spots. Yet, in that final exchange, his desperate slip was the one move she had not expected. Claws had flipped him midair, blocked the dagger, and thrown her off balance with a quick sweep. As she fell, he stumbled forward and instinctively used his hand to pin her to the ground. She stared up at him in shock, struggling to grasp how he had outmaneuvered her. Liz shook Merrim intensely, demanding to know when her brother had become this skilled. Merrim did not have an answer. There was something even more important about the techniques Claws had just shown. His movements had been an almost perfect copy of those he used during his auto-battle state. It seemed he was starting to access those instincts on purpose. Claws himself was just glad he had not landed face first in the dirt. His body had acted completely on its own, and only now did he realize he was still pinning Charlotte to the ground. Charlotte did not hide her admiration. With shining eyes, she told him he was truly impressive and asked him for a moment to breathe. She did a graceful flip into one of her dimensional rifts, disappeared, and reappeared on the other side to lunge directly back at him. The way she landed nearly gave Liz a heart attack. Sitting on top of him, Charlotte asked if he wanted to go another round. A panic, Liz shouted that the whole situation was harassment. Charlotte, sporting a fresh bump on her head, boldly confessed her feelings for Claws and sheepishly admitted she had got a little too excited. She admitted she always went too far when excited, then declared she was finally ready to share what she knew about Gain. She could not say anything for sure, but she had a strong feeling about what he was planning. Gain pointed out that at their current pace, everyone's progress was stalled. The group was stuck roughly between levels 117 and 120, with personal skills already at level 5, and the experience they gained from low-rank creatures, now negligible. The conversation shifted to the existence of dragons, and a hint Gain had once dropped, a way to break through their current limits and surpass everyone else. Claus questioned whether Gain had really been serious about breaking through the level cap. It seemed they had already reached the barrier, which was amazing considering it had only been 3 years. Merrim realized this was the real reason they were searching the dungeons. Claus admitted he was out of ideas, at which point Liz demanded their attention. She stated plainly that she was not an experienced adventurer and did not understand the details of their struggle, so someone needed to explain. To break through the barrier, they would need extremely high-quality magic stones. Leveling up normally required killing monsters or absorbing essence from magic stones. Everyone eventually hit a wall roughly between levels 80 and 120. This plateau was known as the S-level barrier, and the only known way past it was to defeat an S-rank monster and survive the encounter. The most infamous example was the Calamity Dragon, a beast said to be capable of destroying entire kingdoms. Claus noted that legendary figures had defeated such monsters before. Charlotte suspected this was exactly what Gain was planning, but pointed out an obvious flaw in his plan. There was simply not anything that powerful living within this particular mountain. Merrim and Liz watched in slight confusion as Charlotte then threw herself into Claus's arms. She was not completely sure what Gain was actually doing inside the dungeon. Deep within, Gain had reached the same conclusion as the group. The only way forward was to kill an S-rank monster. Since such legendary creatures were hard to find naturally, he had decided to create one. They had done something similar before by feeding the ghouls, the same process that had created the demon ghoul. In other words, an S-rank monster could be created from scratch, as long as there was enough food to fuel its growth. The wyvern they had chosen ate constantly, its hunger seemingly endless, growing in size after devouring thousands of sacrifices. And a deafening crack echoed through the cavern. The beast was shedding its skin, undergoing a rapid transformation. This was the nature of reptilian monsters. They evolved under pressure, becoming fiercer and stronger. The wyvern now had 2 heads instead of 1, and spread its wings in a menacing display. It immediately cut short premature celebration by unleashing a violent attack on the group. A defensive barrier formed by the mercenaries' shields absorbed the blow. Someone screamed for Mika to bring the beast under control, but she was already reaching her limit. She made an attempt to throw it off track using lesser beings. Although the wyvern no longer cared at all about the goblins and kobolds offered up, Gain put pressure on Mika, reminding her that she wasn't weak and that he had higher expectations. Reaching her breaking point, she turned on her underlings, making them tighten the chains holding it back. The wyvern was briefly restrained, although it still towered over them like something that hadn't yet decided if the cage presented a challenge. It roared and unleashed an intense blast toward the sky. Gain were thrilled. A creature as mighty as this one could easily wipe a kingdom off the map. However, trapped far below in the dungeon, its great size also made it prisoner. Once it was at its strongest, it planned to kill it and used the earned experience to push past their limits. Even as they celebrated, a small crack started to appear in their plan. They launched hooked chains at the monster, pulling hard to keep it pinned while they gave it a strong weakening drug. They figured just one more molt would get it to S-rank. Gain then questioned whether any of them had been told the tale of the Calamity Dragon, the black, multi-headed monster that had once destroyed the capital before a hero defeated it. The realization of what they were actually observing left everyone worried. What was standing in front of them was of the same species as that mythical creature, the Lord of Dark Knights and Archwyvern. Their goal was to bring back the legend just to butcher it for experience. Once it molted, they would attack using prepared weapons, having already fed it 3,000 monsters from the family dungeons. Gain demanded the monsters be stuffed with magic stones and ignored any warnings, insisting that they hurry. However, unlike them, the dragon had noticed the crack in the dungeon ceiling growing every passing second, and that became the biggest mistake of Gain and his party, as the dragon used that crack to its advantage and freed itself from the dungeon. From that night onward, local residents spoke in hushed tones of a massive shadow destroying dungeons close by. A few days later, Merrim waited nervously outside Claus's home, knocking until he finally opened the door. She requested to stay the night. Claus immediately slammed the door in her face. She pounded on it, calling him cruel. He suggested she sleep in the fields. Liz heard the noise, recognized Merrim's voice, and stepped in. Claus explained that Merrim was due for a lesson after her recent antic, in which she had used her skills to cheat at a casino, leaving them both with a large debt. Magic and skills were completely prohibited in gambling halls, and they were quickly and completely banned. Liz decided Merrim had been consumed by greed. When Merrim yelled that Claus had also been gambling, Liz's suspicion quickly fell on her brother, and she chased him through the house. Once she was inside, Merrim was accused of trying to use her charms to manipulate Claus. After things calmed down, she explained that her reason for visiting wasn't all about being broke. A dark feeling had been troubling her, similar to the fear she had felt in the catacombs, and she felt they needed to be together. Claus asked whether it was another S-rank threat, possibly a demon lord. She couldn't say for certain, but Claus knew her instincts about danger were always right. Before she could continue, Liz froze near the window. She picked up on a strange, rhythmic scratching that definitely wasn't a bird. The sound made Merrim's survival instinct scream. She pushed Liz to the floor and yelled for Claus to get down, just as a monstrous shape appeared outside the window. Their home fell apart around them. Claus called out desperately for Merrim. Looking up through the destroyed roof, he found himself staring at a gigantic dragon. Its wings flapped with enough power to destroy the buildings nearby. Fire rained in every direction, destroying the town, while terrified residents ran for cover. Claus could hardly take in what was happening. Beast's roar stole the courage from everyone close by. Merrim was worried sick about Liz, who had suffered a head injury in the collapse. When Claus shouted her name in panic, Merrim rushed toward him and covered his mouth. She warned that if the dragon saw them, they were dead, and assured him that Liz's injury wasn't serious. They moved her silently. Merrim explained that Liz needed a high-quality potion to recover. Claus still had one, and started giving it to her right away. Medicine worked instantly, although a dizzy Liz immediately complained about the bitter taste, and said it would be much better with milk and sugar. Claus told her to be serious and jokingly promised her a buffet if she remained brave. However, as soon as he pointed out the source of the noise, Liz was paralyzed by fear and passed out. Merrim scolded him. He argued it was better if she was quiet and unconscious, which was hard to completely argue with. Merrim pressed him to determine what they were going to do next. He told her fighting was not an option. Their only choices were to escape or hide. He determined to wait and wondered aloud which fool was foolish enough to provoke such a creature. Merrim mentioned that the beast was completely black and dual-headed, like the Calamity Dragon from the legends. At this rate, their city would be destroyed, and all they could do was pray, and someone unexpected began attacking the creature, fully drawing its attention. Down below, Claus stared in shock at whoever was adding fuel to the fire. The dragon started gathering energy, preparing a blast that could bring the whole region to its knees. Claus watched helplessly, remembering how the legendary flames of destruction had once turned the capital's palace into a crater lake. He regretted that there was no auto-battle mode possible against something of this scale. At the same time, Merrim became aware of a troubling sensation. Her normally reliable intuition had simply shut down. She felt completely lost. Above them, the group looked on as Charlotte acted. She jumped from their mount toward the imminent danger without a moment's hesitation, diving with resolute determination and sending forth a barrage of daggers directly at the dragon. The creature responded instantly, but Charlotte kept her composure and prepared a follow-up maneuver. She employed her spatial skill, creating a rift in front of herself and another one directly overhead. Watching from afar, Claus immediately recognized the technique. While the others were frozen in fear, Charlotte remained calm, although her companions began to panic as they realized she was standing directly in harm's way. The dragon's blast created a shockwave that knocked Charlotte off balance, sending her falling through the sky, disoriented. Ignoring the danger, Claus rushed to intercept her descent before she crashed. However, she quickly regained control, employing her ability to stabilize herself midair. Claus ended up standing there, out of breath and entirely superfluous. Charlotte seized the opportunity without hesitation. She created another rift, threw herself into his arms, and warmly thanked him for saving her. Merrim, who was witnessing the scene, was indignant at Charlotte for exploiting the situation. Charlotte recognized the voice and responded. Merrim curtly replied that they were not friends. After seeing Liz was still out cold, Claus shared his assurance that her injuries were not serious. Charlotte confirmed that the arch-wyvern was responsible for the devastation. Claus was unfamiliar with the name, so she explained that she had tried to bring it down before it arrived at the city, adding that the beast was specifically enraged because of Gain and his special forces. Coincidentally, that same elite squad was descending from above into the city at that exact moment. They advanced with precision, but the wyvern was immediately alerted to their presence. As the beast roared with fury, Gain used his unique time control power, instantly freezing every target he pointed toward. Taking advantage of the opportunity, Glenn attacked with his atomic rupture, tearing gaping wounds in the creature's hide. Another team member used the atmosphere to generate ice and launched a cryogenic blast right at the dragon, with the intention of forcing the reptile into a deep state of hibernation. Gain appeared smug, announcing that they had come to take charge of the crisis because they were the Special Forces' strongest team. Claus observed quietly, privately noting that absolutely no one requested their help. Gain gave his team permission to use a performance-enhancing booster. The drink substantially increased their attribute, however. The side effects were severe enough that mature adults were warned against consuming more than a single dose per day. Empowered, they charged at the weakened dragon. Gain used his time control to secure the beast once again. Harmon used her magic and rapidly froze the water around it. Glenn jumped in and delivered a devastating blow that destroyed one of the dragon's wings, grounding it completely. Gain instructed the mercenary commander to join the assault as well. Archers fired arrows, pulling cumbersome chains behind them, which became lodged in the beast's flesh and pulled tight to completely immobilize it. One of the dragon's heads fixated its gaze on Gain as he approached, and he ordered his team to get ready for their final attack. From a distance, Claws watched silently. Merrim admitted they were decent, acknowledging their A-rank skills. But she also recalled Charlotte's assertion that they were responsible for Liz's condition, apparently having been meddling deep within the dungeon before the dragon got loose. Claws was furious that his sister was still unconscious. Merrim warned that legendary dragons became even more dangerous when cornered, and she doubted that this team was particularly concerned about the city, despite what appeared to be an impending victory. Her intuition was stirring up more unease by the second. Claws attempted to lighten the atmosphere. Merrim told him to focus. Just as the tension reached its breaking point, the creature raised its tail. Gain was certain he had severed it already. He succeeded in shielding Gain from the unexpected strike, but the force was great enough to send them both flying. Only then did Gain understand what had happened. The beast had shed its skin once more. It now had 3 heads. Its large body had become even more massive. Claws and Merrim watched in astonishment as the dragon molted before their eyes. Gain's choices endangered many, and he was stunned as his team demanded answers. The dragon had fully healed into something more menacing, and Gain was incredulous. A warning came that feeding the monster had quickened its evolution unnaturally, and they were close to losing control. Gain was stubbornly optimistic. At last, he understood that the dragon had surpassed them. He refused to concede. He clenched his fist and used his strongest skill, freezing the dragon and declaring that the winged lizard was no match for his team. With misguided confidence, he told the others to attack, though they knew the freeze would last only seconds. He interrupted them, demanding immediate action. The dragon broke free. It countered swiftly, slamming Gain with its tail. He survived due to a rare amulet, but the 3-headed dragon aimed to finish him, shattering his amulets. Broken, he was near death. The dragon used a breath attack that incinerated everything. It roared victoriously as the special forces lay defeated. An A-rank team had been rendered helpless as hope dwindled for the city. Charlotte appeared from a nearby rift and apologized. Claws told Merrim to find a potion. Charlotte told him to flee. Claws checked his system and insisted victory was possible, but he needed to register the creature. Merrim realized he meant to fight the dragon. She called it a massive engine of destruction, pure despair, and his plan reckless, but escape was futile. She felt the city was doomed. Furthermore, Claws knew Liz loved this city and would be sad to see it destroyed. Merrim saw his shaking legs. He said he was terrified and needed her support. He wondered if her sense of doom had faded slightly when he chose to fight. She said her ability was not that simple, but the feeling had eased slightly, which motivated him. He moved toward the beast. She asked how he planned to strike first, as the plan had no room for error. Charlotte asked if that was all he needed. She warned that the beast's scales could not be Pure Sand's mithril or orichalcum weapons. Noting they needed a different approach, she opened a rift above the dragon. The group looked through the shimmering window at the colossal creature below. Focused on the ground, it had not noticed the threat. Their only target was its eyes. Charlotte said she had tried the same, charging from the front, and almost died for it. She gave Claws an item to levitate, saying his odds were better from above. The choice, she said, was his. Unlike Merrim, she would back his decision. Free falling toward a 3-headed dragon was terrifying, especially with everything riding on surprise. Merrim sighed and agreed to assist. The plan was to dive and blind the monster. Her intuition eased. The strategy improved his chances, and she wondered if this was Claw's courage, the plan. He thanked her. Charlotte smelled fear and determination, calling him a true hero. Resolved, Claws looked into the rift. The group offered support. He told them not to worry and leapt into the portal. In free fall, he plummeted toward the battle. Exiting the portal, dread hit him as the dragon expect was unguarded, though its heads thrashed. On the ground, Merrim readied her magic. Charlotte opened the next gateway, grumbling after Merrim teased her, but did not hesitate. Their attack surged toward the dragon. A glowing sphere drew the creature's gaze. Claws closed the distance to its eye and raised his blade. The sword hit. He had struck the titan. He opened his system to activate auto combat. For a moment, calculation hummed. Then he was delighted the timer set itself to 3 hours and 22 minutes. He needed to trigger it. All 3 heads eyed him lethally. The creature's bloodlust paralyzed him. At the last second, Charlotte appeared through a rift, providing a diversion. Her intervention saved him from being devoured. Merrim pulled her back. Now it was up to Claws. From below, he appeared to have collapsed, unconscious and in the creature's path. Unexpectedly, his left hand was lying on a legendary sword, and all of a sudden, he stood back up on his feet and cut the dragon's leg that was about to crush him. Merrim and Charlotte watched in shock, and were also glad, as it means he managed to activate his skill previously. The sword that Claws was holding was the hero sword a legendary Dragon Slayer sword that was said to be wielded by the hero in past. It was an SS grade weapon, and now Claus, who was actually sleeping with his skill activated, challenged the dragon to come and fight him. With the timer clocking down from 3 hours and 22 minutes. Enraged, the dragon swung its immense tail at him. The girls panicked when he was almost hit, but he began to move the famed sword with strange skill. He slashed at the ground under his feet, causing it to collapse, dropping him out of the tail's path unharmed. While falling, he opened up a deep cut along the creature's tail. The beast flew into a blind rage, launching a flurry of attacks that Claus evaded and countered with startling swiftness. When the dust settled, the dragon glared down at him. He stayed calm in his battle stance. Charlotte was puzzled by the sudden change. Merrim told her to stand back and observe. She clarified that his earlier fall had not been accidental. He was foreseeing every action and responding with a precision that seemed impossible, as if he could see exactly what would happen. She identified this as Claus's auto-combat skill, yet admitted she did not completely grasp how it worked. Charlotte, mostly uninterested in the details, poked Merrim, thinking she looked like an easy target. This only annoyed her. Charlotte then voiced a valid concern. Foresight and speed alone would not be enough to defeat a dragon. As if to prove the point, the beast turned its attention back to them. Its injuries were healing quickly, and even its eye had recovered. It was now obvious that superficial attacks were useless. Even a hero's sword was useless if it missed the vital spot. Merrim then observed that Claus was actually holding a stick and not even holding the sword. Claus motioned forward, revealing that the actual sword was embedded in the ground directly in front of the dragon. As if pre-cut, the ground gave way, making the dragon lose balance and fall directly onto the hidden sword. It landed in an extremely unfortunate way, enduring what was probably the most intense pain of its life. The beast roared with deafening pain. Merrim explained that auto-combat allowed Claus to fight as though he had already become a master of the encounter, an automated route to triumph, since a skill made sure every encounter he had previously simulated. The creature's eyes shone with a threatening intensity, now fully committed to destroying the man who had embarrassed it. As blood stained the earth, Claus pointed a single finger at the beast, indicating it had no chance of winning. The dragon unleashed a powerful shockwave. As the atmosphere grew heavy, the force of the air nearly knocked the girls off their feet. The eyes that had once seen them as insignificant insects were now blood red, exuding the full intent of a cornered dragon wanting to kill. Charlotte could not understand how Claus remained so calm, especially as he was only armed with a wooden stick. He baited the beast again. The dragon used its large paws to uproot the terrain and hurl a storm of rocks in his direction. He jumped effortlessly into the air, balancing himself atop the stick as the rocks flew past, then smoothly dodged a sweeping tail strike while the girls watched. The dragon mustered its strength, getting ready to unleash a last fatal blow. With remarkable skill, Claus vaulted and moved through the air, landing amidst the destruction with the staff back in his hand. He remained calm under the dragon's gaze while the girls struggled to keep up with how fast the battle was going. Seeing him still standing, they cautiously sighed in relief. Then Charlotte screamed a warning. She had noticed the dragon was tricking him into a trap. He was stuck with no way to escape, and her spatial rifts could not reach him fast enough, no matter how skilled. The dragon was about to unleash a devastating area attack, a scorching wave of fire building in its throat. Merrim began sweating, genuinely unable to imagine what Claus could do to survive a blast of that scale. Using his staff, he broke the rock behind him and revealed a figure hiding in the dark. Trembling, Gain finally realized the danger as Claus positioned him as a makeshift shield, as the dragon's attack fully charged. Then, as the attack was unleashed, Gain's hidden power triggered against his will, freezing time and bringing the monster to a sudden halt. Charlotte and Merrim stared in disbelief as the world stood still. Gain could only hold the stasis for a few brief seconds. It was all Claus needed. In that still moment, he grabbed Gain's famed swords, ignoring the coward's complaints about their work, and threw the swords directly at the beast. Each sword was aimed right at one of the creature's heads. As time resumed, the dragon realized too late it had been targeted. All three swords buried themselves deep into its necks. The beast howled in terrible pain. Its chest began to swell. Claus grabbed Gain and slammed him into the dirt to protect him. The creature exploded violently. As Claus sheltered from the fiery shockwave, his companions watched the inferno in stunned silence. Claus stood resolute as the beast burst into flames behind him. The final strike had severed its life force and triggered the explosion. Charlotte was amazed. He had perfectly timed Gain's ability to freeze the incoming assault, landing a technique of such accuracy with surgical precision. She found herself quietly falling for him. Merrim admitted Claus was amazing, then quickly asserted her claim, reminding Charlotte that she was his real partner and warning her to stay away. Charlotte's response was to propose a group event that included Liz, resolving nothing. Liz finally came to and called for her brother, but Claus was still stuck in robot mode. As the dragon wouldn't die, she remembered seeing mithril pots in town and joking about cooking a dragon in them. But now, fully awake, A deafening roar startled her, and she frantically looked for her brother. She spotted him confronting the burning monster, a sight she was unprepared for. The girls greeted her warmly, with Merrim saying Claus was risking everything to protect the city she loved. Even then, the battle wasn't over. Merrim felt something. That roar wasn't a death rattle. It was a rebirth. A new head appeared from the middle of the creature's burnt wounds. The monster now had 4 heads, and Merrim watched as it shed its skin again. Charlotte updated the count to 5. Despite no food nearby, it had forced a second evolution. Its body was at its max, its wounds healed, and Claus was unarmed. And Claus raised a hand. The gesture confused everyone. He made specific motions, and when he closed his fist, Liz understood. He was telling her to retrieve a particular item, a tool she kept in her backpack for emergencies. She readied it and hoped he could last. When Charlotte and Merrim asked how they communicated across a battlefield without words, Liz thought about it and decided she understood him through love. That answer flustered them, though there was no time to investigate it. Charlotte had a plan and was sure that love would help them. Merrim felt that the dragon was about to attack. Liz was doubtful. She couldn't imagine how kitchen items would factor into defeating a 5-headed dragon. And the question was reasonable. A portal opened behind Claus, and the mithril kitchen set hit the ground. He picked the items up, ready to rejoin the fight. It was now a final personal showdown. With 5 heads, the dragon only needed one to survive to win. It had abandoned its legs and wings, focusing on crushing the man before it. Claus was facing a titan using only mithril kitchen items that cost 12 gold coins. Victory seemed impossible. Then the girls saw the knife. Unlike the rest of the set, it wasn't just coated in mithril. It was solid mithril. There was one problem. The blade was finger-sized. Claus put it in his mouth. The girls had to believe he could pull off a miracle. They prayed. As the creature weakened, Merrim sensed the end. Liz clasped her hands and wished her brother luck. To win, Claus needed to strike the dragon's inverted scale with that tiny knife. Instead of attacking, he pointed elsewhere, in a direction opposite to where the dragon was. The girls were confused. Even the dragon seemed curious, until it saw Gain, who was still trying to direct the beast toward Claus, hoping it would incinerate him. Claus remained still, pointing at the coward. The dragon shifted its focus and turned its attention toward the man who had just made himself the most obvious target. The distraction, Claus lacked defensive items and looked like an amateur. Charlotte saw that the beast was evolving mid-combat. Its strikes were becoming faster. Then the group realized that Claus had disappeared. He was moving so fast that all 5 heads scanned the area in confusion. He reappeared on the dragon's back, shocking the monster and his allies. As the heads moved toward him, he began scaling the creature's neck. He jumped high, surrounded by 5 mouths, tracking his every move. Then he hurled the spatula. It struck the spot on the neck that had been weakened by his earlier sword strike. The beast writhed in agony as the weapon returned to his hand. The heads lunged to bite him and only bit each other. Claus used a ladle to hook onto the creature's spikes and dodge an attack. He hopped onto one of the heads, tricked it into snapping at empty air, and it attacked itself. With him weaving between them, the dragon's heads collided. In its ferocity, it tore off one of its own heads. The remaining heads were enraged. Claus sprinted along one of the necks, instruments ready, and baited the next strike. One head approached, unable to land a bite, as though struggling against the pressure of his focus. After attempts, the heads ended up tangled, and the creature roared. Watching, the girls acknowledged that the scene was hard to process. Charlotte noted, the dragon had brought this on itself by growing additional heads. It had become a psychological battle for beasts. Liz remained tense, sensing the fight wasn't finished. The dragon's eyes were fixed on a target, and its tail had begun to swing for a surprise attack. Merrim assured her that Claus wouldn't fall for an obvious trick like that. The dragon's attack missed intentionally. It brutally used its motion to detach its extra heads, leaving only one. The creature was so focused on ending the battle fast that it gave up its own flesh to get rid of the dead weight, slowing it down. Now much faster. It readied its tail for another strike. Claus braced himself, but the force was too much, sending him flying across the clearing. He crashed into the sharp rocks, horrifying his friends. The dragon's last head shot forward, determined to finish things. Only one thought filled its mind at that moment. The armored fool who had kept it locked up was dead. The weaklings who followed him were gone too. But most of all, the dragon wanted revenge on the human who had blinded its eye, dodged its deadly tail, and stabbed it in the stomach, taking away its dignity. The Lord of Skies could no longer fly. It was now crawling in the dirt like a worm, which had not improved its mood. After the explosions and having its heads tied, the dragon had had enough. This small creature had to die. It swept its tail, sending Claus flying across the battlefield into a stone wall. He lost his grip on his knife when he hit the wall. The girls watched in pain as the dragon got ready to use his weakness against him. But Claus desperately grabbed the small blade and threw it at the beast. It bounced off and hit hit the dragon's eye, throwing the monster off course. It bit into a huge rock instead, completely overcome with bloodlust. As claws lay on the ground, he saw a sword stuck in the very rock the dragon had bitten. It was one of the swords he had taken from Gain during the earlier explosion, the only one that hadn't hit its target. As pieces of rock fell around him, Claws reached out and grabbed the hilt tightly. He stood up again, determined, and even the dragon seemed surprised by how tough this small being was. Claws charged forward with the mythical weapon. The blade closed the distance quickly and cut into the dragon's scales, but he needed to push in deeper to reach the beast's heart. The dragon roared angrily. Claws let go of the blade as the creature swung its massive tail at him. The girls knew right away that his attack hadn't been deep enough, and they watched in fear as he stood before the beast again with no weapon. But he still had his hammer, and with a final blow, he drove the sword all the way in. A loud crack echoed through the clearing. They watched anxiously as his auto battle skill counted down its last 5 seconds. Claws landed perfectly as the timer reached 0. The dragon's huge body fell behind him lifeless. Glowing orbs of mana came out of the creature's body and were absorbed by Claws, leveling him up multiple times quickly. When he finally opened his eyes, he felt all of his injuries at once. He was in pain everywhere. He fell to the ground, unable to move because of broken bones and exhaustion, but he knew he had won. He looked to the side, saw the dragon's dead head, and weakly raised a hand to the sky. Liz rushed to him through a spatial rift. She hugged him tightly, crying and scolding him for being so reckless, while Claws struggled to stay awake through the pain. She told him she was glad he lived, and Claws weakly apologized for worrying her so much. Holding him, she told him he was the best. Claws smiled, knowing he didn't regret anything. Soon after, Merrim and Charlotte arrived as well. They almost fell onto his destroyed body, arguing loudly and causing him more pain, not knowing they were being watched. Far above, an elf spy sent by the guild told her bosses that the dragon had been defeated. Against all odds, the dragon was dead, and the city had a new hero. At the guild, invitations poured in from the Order of Mages and the Knight Brigade, all wanting to recruit the mysterious dragon slayer. A big commotion broke out outside until the heavy doors slammed shut, blocking the crowd. Inside, hushed whispers filled the air as everyone noticed Claws getting special treatment, causing rumors among those who still didn't believe he could have defeated the Calamity Dragon. Claws enjoyed it. He healed in just 3 days thanks to his level gains, and he came out into a world that now treated him like a star. He thought his time had come and wanted to publicly announce that he was the Dragon Slayer. The guild master hesitated, warning that it would only bring more attention. Merrim added that Liz might actually kill him for being so reckless. Discouraged by the thought of Liz's anger, Claws gave up on the idea. The elder then revealed the real reason for the meeting: a prisoner transfer. Gain was led out in chains, an iron ball dragging at his feet, as he and his party were marked as criminals heading to the capital. As the guards made a path, the citizens yelled and blamed Gain for the dragon's appearance, demanding his execution. Gain shouted, ordering them to be silent, emphasizing that there was no proof of him drawing the monster, and insisting they defend him. This made the crowd angrier, leading to a barrage of rocks until the guard stepped in. The guard told him that Micah, saved from the dungeon, had already testified against him for leaving her to die. While Micah's complete statement was still being processed, Gain noticed a familiar face. He scoffed at Claws and mocked him, saying Claws had only survived due to luck, and repeating his claim that Claws was a failure with a completely useless skill. But his memory of the event still clouded. Claws calmly asked if Gain had done something to him. The calmness enraged Gain, and a guard had to silence him. Charlotte, meanwhile, was sentenced to tough work in the dungeon. With their home gone, Claws decided to bring Liz as they got ready to go for the dungeon. Still angry about her brother's actions, Liz demanded that he bow to her as an apology. He did so. Later, at a busy restaurant where Liz had a part-time job, rumors circulated that the place served dragon meat because of a secret connection. The travelers stopped to enjoy that specific delicacy before leaving the city. Outside, Merrim and Claws were sitting on the ground in silence while Liz glared at them. Merrim wanted to know what Claws had done this time, and he explained that the guild had told him about Charlotte's situation, meaning they needed to go to the dungeon right away. Noticing Liz's new clothes, Claws gave her a compliment. She dismissed it, saying it was just a uniform for her job, and warned him not to think he could charm his way out of anything. Merrim watched them argue and privately realized how well they got along. Liz was working to cover household costs, and when Claws said that her cooking would make her a great wife someday, she secretly liked this, though she did not show it. She sighed and joined them for a meal. She was worried for Charlotte, but even more worried about her brother's safety. Claws insisted Charlotte was innocent.